Chapter 292. Sang Sang didn't know how to play chess, and her moves were terrible. No matter how the old man thought about how to deal with it, he could not turn the situation around. As the chess pieces fell one after another, Black's side was obviously in an advantageous position and was about to win the mid-game. However, there was no pride on Chen Pipi's face. His expression was unusually solemn and serious. He did not know why there was sweat on his temples, but it kept flowing down his round cheeks. On the contrary, the old man looked calm and relaxed. He drank the tea that Sang Sang had just brought to him and casually put down a chess piece. He sighed and said, "I haven't played chess for 14 years. I'm really rusty." Hearing the words, 14 years, Chen Pipi wiped the sweat off his face. Although he didn't show any abnormality, he was screaming in his heart, "It's him, it's him." The old man looked up at him and said with a smile, "I let you play. Why did you leave?" Chen Pipi said respectfully, "Because you are stronger than me. I can't beat you, so I left." The old man looked at the sweat on his face and asked with a smile, "What are you afraid of?" Chen Pipi answered honestly, "I'm afraid of you." The old man shook his head and sighed, "I've served Haotian all my life, but I don't want others to be afraid of me." After a moment of silence, Chen Pipi said, "The original intention and the result often don't correspond." The old man looked at him and suddenly asked, "Your surname is Chen?" Chen Pipi answered, "Yes, I'm Chen Pipi." The old man nodded and said, "You know, I just came out not long ago. When I was in there, I heard that you ran away from the abbey and are now a disciple of the headmaster of the academy?" Chen Pipi stared at the chess pieces on the chessboard and said, "Yes." The old man smiled and said, "Then why are you afraid of me? In fact, even if you're not a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, I won't make things difficult for you for the sake of the abbey. Peach Mountain is not far from the abbey." Chen Pipi raised his arm again and wiped the sweat off his face. He suppressed his nervousness and put a black chess piece on the chessboard in silence. The old man lowered his head to look at the black chess piece he had placed. He gently shook his head and said, "It is said that the affairs of the world are like a game of chess. In my opinion, it is not the chess pieces but the path of the game. No matter how far two lines look, there will always be a time when they meet." Chen Pipi smiled bitterly and said, "I'd rather be a chess piece. Black and white will never come into contact." The old man said, "It's really a coincidence. I met a monk from the temple yesterday." Chen Pipi was slightly surprised and asked, "Someone from Xiankong Temple is in Chang'an? What happened next?" The old man said, "He's blind. I think it will take some time for him to regain consciousness. When I was a child, he once told me that you were the real great person on the Peach Mountain. So I don't understand. It's rare to meet me in this vast thousand world, but you are still unwilling to do anything." At this time, Sang Sang noticed the strangeness on both sides of the chessboard. Holding the new urn, she looked at the two in surprise. The old man was silent for a while and put a white chess piece on the chessboard. He calmly said, "The Abbey Dean is the Abbey Dean, and you are you. And you can't control the relationship between you and the Abbey Dean. So this matter has nothing to do with you." He raised his head and looked at Chen Pipi curiously. He asked, "In your opinion, I am a cruel and murderous person?" Chen Pipi smiled bitterly and said, "The great divine priest of light is pure and quiet. You are known as the person closest to Haotian in spirit. But everyone in the world knows that you are not an ordinary great divine priest of light. In the last 20 years, the hierarch of the divine hall and the great divine priest of judgment and the great divine priest of revelation have not killed as many people as you." The old man sighed softly and said, "This is about the two things that happened more than 10 years ago." Chen Pipi slowly raised his head and bravely looked at the old man's eyes that seemed to be able to see through all the light and darkness in the world. He said honestly and fearlessly, "The headmaster and eldest brother are not here. But since I know that you are in Chang'an, I have to try to make you stay. Otherwise, I will not have the face to go back to the academy to see second brother." The old man shook his head and looked at him disapprovingly. He said, "Before I was imprisoned, the headmaster of the academy was never the most disgusting kind of moral peddler in the world. Why do you trap yourself like this?" Chen Pipi honestly said, "If I saw you but did not dare to say a word and watched you leave Chang'an, second brother would definitely beat me to death when he knew about this." The old man sighed and said, "Mr. Second, you are not young anymore. Why do you still have such a temper?" Chen Pipi sincerely said, "Why don't you let me ask second brother to come and meet you?" The old man smiled and shook his head. He thought that this child's shamelessness was somewhat cute. After thinking for a moment, he turned back to look at Sang Sang and said with regret, "I have to leave." Sang Sang held the new urn and listened for a long time. But she did not understand anything. She only understood the last few paragraphs and realized that the teacher who taught her divine skills was the great divine priest of light from the West Hill Divine Palace. She also vaguely understood that the whole world seemed to be looking for the old man. The new urn did not fall from her arms and smash into pieces on the ground. But she held the edge of the urn tightly because she could not suppress the shock in her heart. The old man looked at her and suddenly said very seriously and solemnly, "The shadow of the dark night is no longer in Chang'an. Now the academy has met me, so I have to leave. Are you willing to go with me?" Sang Sang looked down at the mouth of the urn and smelled the fresh sand. She was silent. The old man was very kind to her. The old man was very lonely. He seemed to put the last weight of his life on her shoulders. The old man hoped that she could leave with him. She knew all these, but she had a reason not to leave. She looked up at the old man and said, "I want to wait at home for young master to come back." The old man had already expected to hear this answer. He smiled slightly, but there was some sadness in his smile. At this moment, a very angry scolding sounded outside the old brush pen shop. "Who knows when your young master will come back? But I am curious, who dares to kidnap my disciple's handmaiden?" Tatter, tatter, tatter. An old Taoist priest walked in with his head up. His triangular eyes flashed with wretchedness and anger when he saw the person beside the chessboard, who was wearing an ordinary cotton-padded jacket and stooping like an ordinary old man. The wretchedness in his triangular eyes suddenly disappeared when he saw the person beside the chessboard, who was wearing an ordinary cotton-padded jacket and stooping like an ordinary old man. He turned into a flowing spring on the peak and was extremely calm. The moment before the storm, it was always extremely calm. Great divine priest of light Wei Guangming, who escaped from Peach Mountain, lived peacefully in an inconspicuous bookstore in an inconspicuous side alley of Chang'an City for a period of time. Then he met Master Yen Sei on a very inconspicuous winter day. One was the most unfathomable divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace for hundreds of years, the other was the divine talisman master who had gone the furthest in talisman Taoism for hundreds of years, the trader of Haotian Taoism, and the minister of offerings of the South School of Haotian Taoism. What would be the result of such a sudden and inexplicable encounter that even fate would be shocked? There was a long silence in the old brush pen shop, as if it was dead. Master Yen Sei looked at the old man. The old man looked at Master Yen Sei, Sang Sang stared at the two of them. Chen Pipi stared at the chessboard in front of him, with cold sweat pouring down. Master Yen Sei sighed and said with emotion, "I have been looking for you in Chang'an City for many days." The old man sighed and said with emotion, "I have been hiding from you in Chang'an City for many days." Master Yen Sei continued to say with emotion, "I don't want to meet you like this." The old man also said with emotion, "I don't want to meet you either." Master Yen Sei gradually stopped sighing and looked at his old friend who he hadn't seen for many years. He said calmly, "But since we have met, in addition to talking about the old days, there are always some things that must be done." The old man stood up, bowed to his old friend who he hadn't seen for many years, and said calmly, "Please. Tomorrow morning, I will send my leader to the airport to attend the class reunion. I have to drive, so I must sleep. So I will update first. After I come back from the airport in the morning and sleep, there should be another chapter in the afternoon or on a rest day. I feel uneasy and can't have a good rest. Double monthly votes are really annoying. I don't want to be so diligent. Don't force me like this. This is the plot of an old friend coming to meet me in 20 years. I really want to write slowly and happily. The monthly votes are about to be used up. You should vote for me quickly to comfort me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 293. Master Yen Sei walked to the table, looked at the old man, shook his head and sighed. Then he turned to look at Chen Pipi, who bowed his head like a quail and shook his head again. He sighed and asked, "How is the Abbey Dean recently?" Hearing this question, Chen Pipi raised his head and answered doubtfully, "You know, I have been in the academy these years. How can I know how he is doing?" Yen Sei gently stroked his sparse beard, stared at him, and said impatiently, "Since you don't know, and we can't talk about the old days, you have already run out of the abbey. Do I still need to give you face?" Chen Pipi was more and more confused. He touched the back of his head and said, "Of course not." Master Yen Sei roared, "Then why don't you give me your seat? Why are you standing here like a goose raised by the second brother?" Chen Pipi hurriedly stood up, gave up his seat and stood aside. At this time, he realized that this old Taoist actually wanted to play chess with the great divine priest of light. He couldn't help feeling surprised and helpless. He thought, "Who knows what you two old farts are thinking about? Who can think that the great divine priest of light actually invited you to take a seat?" Master Yen Sei didn't care what he was thinking. He gently stroked his Taoist robe and elegantly sat down. He glanced at the situation on the chessboard and found that the black chess piece was in a great advantage. He was very satisfied and looked at Chen Pipi with appreciation. The old man opposite the chessboard smiled and spread his right hand, indicating that it was Yen Sei's turn. Master Yen Sei put down a chess piece and smacked his lips. He said, "How have you been recently?" The old man held a white chess piece and answered softly, "Every year when you go back to Peach Mountain, you will go to the U prison to see me. Of course, you know how I've been there. Recently, I've been really good." Master Yen Sei stared at the crisscross chess pieces on the chessboard. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "Even if you don't have a good life on Peach Mountain, why do you have to come to Chang'an?" The old man smiled and replied, "That day, your younger brother also asked me this question." Although one of them didn't wear a Taoist robe, there were indeed two old Taoists beside the chessboard, and they were the two most outstanding old Taoists of Haotian Taoism these years. They were qualified to leave their names in history books. Although Chen Pipi was a grand cultivator who had entered the knowing destiny state and his identity and background were enough to disdain the world, he had to obediently play the role of a student in front of the two old Taoists. He honestly served tea and dared not speak. Master Yen Sei took a sip of tea and licked off a tea leaf stuck on his front tooth with the tip of his tongue. He frowned and felt the tea was too bad. He looked up and said, "Abbey Taoist used to think that you were the Taoist Yen Yen Temple and said, Taoist Yen Ti and said, you Taoist God. And Yen was, and said. Abbey Yen K Taoist Yen thought the Taoist in and said, old. And thought. Yen Taoist Long Taoha thought. Taoist. And said. And. Long and he said. Master Shi. Long, he. Priest. And said in. And face. Yen. And. Here is Xiaofan. Here is my big tactical array. You can't beat me." The old man nodded. He knew clearly that Xiaofan was the legendary god-stunning array. Yan Sei was the one who controlled the array. As long as he was in Xiaofan, he would be invincible. "I still hold the same view." The old man looked at the chessboard and said with a smile, "I'm just an old Taoist who is struggling to survive. It's a big waste to use a big tactical array like Xiaofan on me." "I think you think so." Master Yan Sei sighed and said, "It's good to say that we are struggling at death's door. We are all old and are about to return to the embrace of Haotian. It's always good to enjoy the joys and sorrows of the world for a while. If you didn't come this time, I could at least live for a year and a half. I believe you could also have more time." The old man looked at him and said calmly, "You know my eyes can sometimes see some pictures before time, so I know it's hard for me to leave Xiaofan this time." Master Yan Sei shook his head and said, "In this case, why do you have to come here?" The old man said, "Everyone will eventually return to the origin of life and the embrace of Haotian. This can't make me worry. Time is just the order of events. For us who use time, we need to use time to complete the things that should be completed. If we can't complete it, then time is meaningless." Master Yan Sei was silent. He gently put the black chess piece between his fingers on the chessboard and said, "So you came to Xiaofan to go back to the beginning of time and finish the thing that you did in those years?" The old man answered but didn't say anything. Master Yan Sei also smiled and looked at him. He said, "In the end of cultivation, what we cultivate is the original heart. How can we change our minds when we are old guys who are going to decay? Well, anyway, I have a successor now, so I don't have too much attachment to this world. By the way, you were locked up at that time, so you may not know it." The old man was very clear about Yan Sei's attainments in talisman Taoism and how difficult it was for a divine talisman master to find a successor with potential. Hearing that Yan Sei had found a successor, he couldn't help but be surprised and happy for him. Master Yan Sei looked at his expression and proudly said, "My apprentice is not an ordinary person. She can understand the essence of talisman Taoism after being drenched in the rain. In the future, her realm will definitely be far higher than mine. I don't want to argue with a boring old man like you about other things, but I can pass on this skill, which is much better than you." The old man smiled and looked at Sang Sang, who had been silent. He said softly, "I also have a disciple, and she is quite good. I think she will be better than your apprentice in the future." In the old man's eyes, Sang Sang was a gift from Haotian and the greatest lucky chance in his life. Even if Yan Sei was lucky enough to find a successor of Divine Talisman Master, he could not be compared with his beloved apprentice in any case. Master Yan Sei was slightly stunned. He was shocked that the Divine Priest of Light had found his successor before he left. However, following the old man's eyes, he suddenly found that the so-called successor was actually Sang Sang. The expression on his face instantly became extremely strange. In the shock and astonishment, he began to have an extremely irrepressible feeling of absurdity. "Your apprentice is this black-faced little girl?" The old man looked at him strangely and then said seriously, "Yes, but Sang Sang is not black-faced." "Ha ha 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 ha." Master Yan Sei pointed at Sang Sang with one hand and covered his belly, which was aching from laughing too much. He looked at the old man and said, "Do you know that the apprentice who makes you so proud and coquettish like this, is my apprentice's maid?" The old man was stunned. He frowned and asked, "Isn't that person the core disciple of the headmaster of academy?" Master Yan Sei proudly said, "Taking advantage of the absence of the headmaster of academy, I also grabbed the title of teacher." The old man sighed with emotion and said, "I see. I didn't expect that young man to have such great luck. But even if Sang Sang is his maid, so what? In the future, Sang Sang will understand the divine skill that I teach her. Even if she doesn't go to the West Hill Divine Palace to inherit the throne, she will be the most outstanding figure in the younger generation of Haotian Taoism. How can your apprentice compare with her? Master Yen Sei snorted and scornfully said, not to mention that my apprentice is the future nation master of Tang, and not to mention that she will have any good fortune under the guidance of the headmaster of academy. Just look at the relationship between them. Even if this girl becomes the divine priest of light in the future, she will still have to make the bed for my apprentice and even warm his bed when she meets him. The old man sighed and said, "Are you very proud?" Master Yen Sei spat and said fiercely, "At least I can surpass you in one aspect." Why shouldn't I be proud? It seemed to be a warm conversation between old friends. But between the lines, there were countless wind, frost, rain, dew, divine light and Taoist aura. The childlike stubborn dispute was actually just a play before life and death. At this time, Sang Sang took a broom and clean water from the backyard to clean the spit on the ground. She didn't understand what the two old men were talking about. She just felt that they seemed to be very fierce. She was a little worried that they would quarrel or even fight. Chen Pipi, who had been sitting quietly by the chessboard, heard these words clearly. Being between the aura of the two top figures in the world and feeling the Taoist connotation of the unreleased fighting desire, he was extremely nervous and scared. His fat body was forced to sweat several times and his body was a little weak. He could no longer sit down. He could no longer pretend that nothing had happened and that this was just two old men bickering under the locust tree by the well at the corner of the street. He stood up and said, panting heavily, "Can I leave first?" The old man and Master Yen Sei looked at the chessboard and said in unison, "No." Beside the chessboard, Chen Pipi was a stabilizer as well as a witness. His origin was a stabilizer, and his identity in the academy was a witness. If he left at this time, Master Yen Sei couldn't control the old man to leave, and then he would start in advance. Chen Pipi was startled by the two old Taoists speaking at the same time. His chubby body trembled and knocked over the chessboard on the table. Pa, 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 pa. The black and white chess pieces fell to the ground and rolled everywhere. Master Yen Sei looked at the empty chessboard and sighed, "It seems that this game can only end here." After a moment of silence, the old man nodded. Sang Sang held the broom and stood aside nervously. Although she couldn't understand what the two old men were talking about, she vaguely felt that something bad would happen soon. One was the teacher of the young master, and the other was her teacher. Sang Sang didn't want them to fight. Fighting was better than playing chess, even if they continued to quarrel during the game. She put the broom aside, squatted down and began to pick up the black and white chess pieces scattered on the ground. Then she came to the table with the chess pieces and put them on the chessboard one by one. Not long after, the situation on the chessboard was restored as before, and no chess pieces were in the wrong position. Fortunately, I had a look at it, or there would be no way. Sang Sang patted her chest with some lingering fear, and then looked at the two old men at the table and said, "Go on." The two old men didn't know what to say. Chen Pipi stared at the black and white chess pieces on the chessboard and didn't know what to say. Sang Sang slightly clenched her hands behind her back, and slowly lowered her head to look at the old shoes on her skirt. She murmured softly, "It's done. Why don't you continue?" Suddenly, she raised her head and looked at the two old men with her bright willow-shaped eyes. "Are you hungry? Then I'll cook noodles for you. How about noodles with fried eggs? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 294. No scallion. No vinegar. Add more noodles. The last one who made the request was obviously Chen Pipi. Then he looked at the chessboard that had been restored to its original state, and his thick eyebrows were raised. His face was full of frustration and shame, and he actually forgot that he was in an extremely horrible environment at this time. He thought that the little handmaiden could remember all the positions of the chess pieces with just a glance. How could he be proud of his head in front of her? How could he still have the face to say that he was a genius? The old man Wei Guangming looked at Master Yen Sei and said with a smile, "My female disciple is very excellent." Master Yen Sei looked at the thin figure disappearing in the backyard and said with emotion, "She is really amazing." The excellent and amazing that the two old men said had little to do with Sang Sang's mind, which shocked Chen Pipi. Instead, they were talking about a kind of temperament that only the old men in their state could understand. It was the kind of unique temperament that seemed stupid because of absolute transparency, but actually could accurately and clearly reflect the world. Master Yen Sei withdrew his gaze and looked at the old man and said, "We are all old. Even if we don't fight to death, we are close to death. After all, this is the last time we meet, so let's have a bowl of noodles." The fragrant noodles with fried eggs were served. One bowl without vinegar, one bowl without scallion, and one bowl with noodles over the edge of the bowl. After eating the noodles, the two old men finished the endgame in silence. There was no number, so they didn't know the result. Then they refused Sang Sang's reward of another bowl of noodles and another game of chess, and began to recall the past. Sang Sang made 3 bowls of tea again, and then she and Chen Pipi each took a small stool and sat down like students to listen to the past. Yen Sei and Wei Guangming were the oldest generation in Haotian Taoism. Although in the past 14 years, one was laughing in the world, and the other was imprisoned in the back of Peach Mountain, compared with the time they knew each other, 14 years was too short. So the past was very long, and those common memories were very rich. They started from the time when they were still little Taoist. They talked about how they went to the Revelation Institute and how they went to the Jishou Abbey to be appointed as the great divine priest. The two old men talked for a long time and still could not finish. Of course, most of the time, it was Master Yen Sei who talked a lot. The great divine priest of light just listened calmly with a smile. Occasionally, in order to avoid misunderstandings between the two juniors, he would interject to argue. For example, the beard of the headmaster of the Revelation Institute was burned by the current hierarch lord, not burned by him with divine skills. Also, on the way to the Jishou Abbey, he did not have diarrhea because of nervousness, but was secretly cast a cold talisman by Yen Sei. Those naughty little Taoist children had become big shots in the world today. The man who once burned the beard of the headmaster of the Revelation Institute had become the powerful hierarch of the Divine Hall. Someone had become Master Yen Sei, and someone had become the divine priest of light. However, as long as one had those times, who could not help recalling them occasionally? These memories were very warm, with a unique feeling of twilight nostalgia. Looking at the warm twilight outside the old brush pen shop, the great divine priest of light found that time passed so fast with these memories, and it was already the real dusk. It was quiet outside the old brush pen shop at dusk, and no sound could be heard in Lin 47th Street. The old man looked outside the door with a smile and did not say anything. At that time, we were young and naughty. But you have always been the smartest and the most honest one. Master Yen Sei looked at him and said, "After your reminder, you found that the little girl Sang Sang is really like you in those days. She is transparent from inside to outside, without any impurities." The old man lovingly looked at Sang Sang on the small bench and said, "I am not as good as her." Master Yen Sei sighed and said, "Those who can sit on the divine priest of light must be so transparent? So that they can be closer to the essence of Haotian than us. But what does transparency mean? Can it reflect the original appearance of the world? If the world is black, you are also black? That's why so many divine priests of light eventually went astray." The old man shook his head and said with a smile, "Transparency is colorless, but black is colorless and lusterless. You and I are in the world of Haotian full of light. Transparency is light and the enemy of darkness." Hearing the words, "enemy of darkness," Master Yen Sei fell into a long silence. After a long time, he slowly raised his head and looked at the old man seriously, saying, "Do you still remember Lotus?" The old man was slightly stunned and frowned, saying, "How can I not remember?" Master Yen Sei asked, "Is he light or dark?" The old man shook his head and said, "When he was on the divine priest of judgment and I was on the divine priest of light, I began to suspect him when I saw the seed of heavenly black jade oozing with dirty blood. But before I exposed him, he saw through fate and left Peach Mountain. Finally, he died under the sword of Mr. Ku." The reason why the Divine Hall never mentioned this and didn't mention this person was that they cared about the reputation of Haotian Taoism. But in my opinion, the 32 petals of lotus, no matter how dazzling and clean they are just some pastel on the petals made of dried mud. Master Yen Sei stared at his eyes and said in a low voice, "After the destruction of the Devil's Doctrine, the Divine Hall recruited many powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine. If you say that light can't give any chance to the dark, how do you explain this? If the bloody cases in those years were the last resort to destroy the dark shadow, then what about the shadow of the Divine Hall now?" The old man said, "It's not the same. The dark shadow is the son of Yama." Master Yen Sei slammed the table angrily and said, "Why are you so pedantic? The underworld is just a legend and has never appeared. Back then, you violated the hierarch's order and made a bloody storm in Chang'an City, but you didn't find the son of Yama. Why are you still so absurd today?" The old man said, "In fact, both the Abbey Dean and the hierarch believed what I saw." Master Yen Sei stared at his eyes and said coldly, "But the result is that you are locked in the U prison." The old man calmly looked back at him and said, "I am the light of the world. Those who follow me will not walk in the dark, but must get the light of life. Those who doubt me will walk in the dark and can't be free." Seeing that he was so stubborn, Master Yen Sei waved his sleeves angrily and shouted, "Then tell me where the shadow of the night you saw was. Where is the son of Yama? Who do you want to kill in Chang'an?" The old man said softly, "I don't know either." Hearing this answer, Master Yen Sei was stunned, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. He looked at him and said in a trembling voice, "Even you don't know who the son of Yama is and whether he really exists." The great divine priest of light, who was as transparent as glass and sincere as a bright lamp, did not hesitate to become a big devil with blood on his hands. "You were willing to be imprisoned in the U prison for 14 years, which made countless people sad. Don't you regret it at all?" The old man was silent for a long time, and a trace of confusion occasionally flashed on his old face. Then the confusion quickly turned into calmness and firmness, "But the problem is that I know he exists." Master Yen Sei frowned and looked at him and said, "Then who is he?" The old man looked at the dark night that gradually covered the old brush pen shop and calmly said, "Since he is the son of Yama, he naturally hides himself very deeply. Even he may not know his true identity until today. You ask me who he is, and I can't give you an answer now. But since I could see him in Chang'an that year, he must exist. Whether he escaped from the general's mansion or survived the corpses in the village of the Yen territory, he is him." Suddenly, the old man frowned and looked at Sang Sang and asked, "What's wrong?" Sang Sang's dark little face became a little pale at this time, and her two little hands tightly grasped the hem of her clothes, but her expression was still calm. After hearing the question, she whispered, "I don't know why I'm a little tired." The old man said with pity, "Then go to sleep quickly." Sang Sang turned to look at Master Yen Sei and pursed her lips without saying a word. Master Yen Sei sighed and said, "If my disciple knows that I let you not have a good rest, he will definitely not let me go. Go to sleep peacefully. We two old guys won't do anything while you are asleep. We will definitely wake you up." The old man looked at Chen Pippi and said, "It's late, and the person you are waiting for is already here. Let's go." Chen Pippi wiped the sweat on his forehead that seemed to never stop today, and very respectfully bowed to the two old men. Then he pushed the door and walked out of the old brush pen shop. The pine branches in the backyard were still smoking. Because Sang Sang forgot to take care of it for a while, the smoke became a little bigger. Probably because of this, Sang Sang's eyes were a little red because of the smoke. She quietly washed her face and feet, climbed into the cold bed on the north brick bed, and opened her eyes to look at the faint starlight outside the window. She thought that if Ning Ke saw the same starlight as her at this time, he might start to talk nonsense again. Because of frugality, the surface of the brick bed was a little warm. This year's Chang'an city was colder than last year's, and she still didn't feel warm after lying down for a long time. She couldn't help but put her little hands to her lips and take 2 hot breaths. The starlight shone on her palms, which were full of blood marks caused by her fingernails. Sang Sang had a great fear in her heart when her teacher talked about the general's mansion and the villages in the Yen territory. If she hadn't forcibly calmed her mind with pain, perhaps her body could not help but tremble at that time. She didn't hear Ning Ke talk about the general's mansion, but she knew it, but she didn't ask. She also knew that Ning Ke killed the censor Zhang Yiqi and the blacksmith, and even wrote a not very good poem about it, but she still didn't ask. Ning Ke didn't want to talk about it, so she didn't ask. But as Ning Ke said, she was not stupid, just a little stupid, and when it was necessary to be smart, she was smarter than anyone else, so Sang Sang knew everything. The son of Yama, sounds like a terrible thing. Sang Sang's little face was pressed against the cold pillow, and she looked at the winter starlight falling in front of the window. She muttered to herself, "But I've lived with you for so many years, I can only live with you secretly." That's all for today. I hope it's to your satisfaction. Tomorrow, I'll write more chapters and finish this paragraph. If it's good, please give me a vote. If you still have any votes left, whether it's a monthly vote or a recommendation vote, please give them to me. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 295. I heard that they are playing chess. It's over at dusk. I have to drag you to finish this game with me. Your Majesty, the game of chess will end eventually. I can't sleep well tonight. I have to find some ways to get through this tiredness. In the imperial study deep in the imperial city, Li Zhongyi, the emperor of the Tang Empire, looked at the chessboard in front of him and said angrily. The game of chess had started in the daytime, but it had not reached the middle of the night, which really made him feel a little impatient. Monk Huangyang smiled bitterly and replied, "Your Majesty, when you reach the realm of the divine priest of light and Master Yen Sei, you can be regarded as people outside the world. No matter how vigilant we are in the world, it really has little to do with them." The atmosphere in Chang'an tonight was tense and depressing. Except for the shop on Lin 47th Street, the Imperial Palace was naturally the most heavily guarded place. According to the rules, since the nation master Li Qingshan was not here, Monk Huangyang, as the younger brother of the emperor, would not leave His Majesty's side. His Majesty reached out to sweep the chess pieces in front of him, walked out of the imperial study and stood in front of the remnant snowflake tree. He quietly looked at Chang'an city under the night sky and suddenly said, "Do you believe in the legend of the underworld invasion?" Monk Huangyang put his palms together and shook his head after a moment of silence. A gust of night wind blew, and His Majesty coughed. The coughing became louder and louder, and finally he bent down in pain. He waved away those eunuchs and palace maids who heard the coughing and took out a handkerchief from his sleeve to gently wipe the corner of his mouth. Looking at the deep night, he said, "I only hope that if the underworld invasion is not a legend, it will come earlier." Monk Huangyang heard the ominous meaning hidden in His Majesty's words. Thinking of the previous coughing, he slightly frowned and looked at His Majesty's back, saying worriedly, "Your Majesty's cold deficiency is acting up. You'd better go back to your room." The emperor shook his head slowly and said, "The headmaster once said that my cold deficiency is not serious. As long as I can suppress it, I can't jump out to rebel. If I can't suppress it, then it's my fate." Although Huang Yang was the younger brother of the Emperor of Tang, he did not get along with the emperor for many years like the nation masterly Qingshan. Therefore, he did not know the story between the Emperor of Tang and the girl from the Devil's Doctrine. Therefore, he was worried and puzzled when he heard this. He thought that even the headmaster of academy could not get rid of the emperor's cold illness completely. When Chen Pipi walked out of the shop, the blazing flames in Lin 47th Street instantly disappeared, leaving only a tall ancient crown. He covered his head with his hands and walked over, standing obediently behind the crown. Second brother looked at the closed door of the old brush pen shop with an indifferent and calm expression, but there was a faint flame of excitement in his eyes, just like the club on his head that was about to burn in the twilight. There was no one in the alley. The doors of the fake antique shop and the grocery store were all closed. A square stool appeared out of nowhere beside the gray wall under the winter tree. Second brother was sitting on the stool with his tall and straight figure, like a pine tree on the edge of a cliff. The delicate and lovely little attendant was quietly guarding him like a white stone under the pine tree. Looking at the closed door, second brother suddenly asked, "They haven't started fighting yet?" Chen Pipi lowered his head and replied respectfully, "They have been talking about the old days." Second brother's serious face showed a displeased expression. He said, "They are all old people after all. They always do things in a sloppy way. Since they all insist that they are right, in the end, they still have to use their fists to reason things out. Why do they need to talk about the old days for such a long time? They are so clingy that they don't deserve to be called gentlemen." Chen Pipi wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and dared not to say anything. Second brother's absolutely straight eyebrows suddenly frowned. He gently lifted the front lapel of his gown and then held the ancient crown that did not move a bit. He said, "They still don't want to fight. Do they want me to wait for a whole night?" Seeing second brother's movement, Chen Pipi knew that second brother was a little impatient to waste time on these meaningless waiting and was ready to enter the old brush pen shop. Suddenly, he was shocked and his back was soaked with sweat again. At this time, in the old brush pen shop, such horrible figures as the great divine priest of light and Master Yen Sei were confronting each other. If second brother joined in, who knew how big the storm would be? How many broken tiles would be left in this street? Thinking of this, he could no longer care about the respect he had for second brother and the fact that second brother hated to be messed up by others. He reached out and grasped second brother's wide sleeves tightly. With a trembling voice, he sincerely begged, "Senior brother, please don't go in again." Second brother looked at the wrinkled sleeves and asked expressionlessly, "If they can enter, why can't I?" According to Chen Pipi's real thoughts, wind, rain, light, and color could enter, but the reason why second brother couldn't enter the old brush pen shop was very simple. No matter how many people the two old men in the shop had killed, at least they were calm now. No matter what decision they made, they would think twice and could still maintain a state of peace for the time being. But according to second brother's temperament, even the direction of his clothes should be classified into the truth, and he insisted on fighting without arguing. Once he entered the old brush pen shop, there would be an earth-shattering fight. What's more, do you think I didn't see the flame of excitement in your eyes when you pretended to be serious and solemn? Do you think I didn't know that you had been suppressed by the headmaster of the academy and eldest brother for too many years, and you couldn't leave Chang and to wander around the world these 2 years because you had to preside over the academy? That's why you were full of fighting desire. Today, you finally met the divine priest of light who could be called an opponent. How could you let it go? It didn't matter what he thought. What mattered was that Chen Pipi knew that if he tried to persuade second brother like this, he would definitely be beaten violently and second brother would still walk into the old brush pen shop. So he tried to persuade second brother earnestly, "It's not wrong to be slow. Eldest brother is also very slow, but we still have to wait. Second brother said unhappily, how can senior brother be the same as others? Seeing that bringing up eldest brother didn't work, Chen Pippi made up his mind and grabbed second brother's sleeves and whispered a few words. Note, second brother frowned slightly and waved his hand to signal the cute little attendant who had been silently waiting by the side to return to the academy. He adjusted his ancient crown and tidied his clothes. Then he closed his eyes and waited quietly on the stool under the tree. From dusk to midnight, many people came to the Lin 47th Street. The Huaihua general, who looked solemn and iron-blooded, represented the imperial military. The imperial censor, who looked unyielding, represented the civil officials of the imperial court. So did the pale and haggard nation master Li Qingshan. The representatives of all forces of the Tang Empire gathered here for only one purpose. They were here for the stooped old man in the old brush pen shop, for the bloody storm that the old man had set off in Chang'an and the Yan territory, and for the case of Xianwei General's rebellion that had been buried deep in the yellow papers. For more than a decade, the Tang Empire had never looked into that case, because it involved too much and had too wide an impact. It was related to the prince and General Xiahou, and even more related to the West Hill Divine Palace and a more mysterious source. However, the Divine Priest of Light, who had plotted this back then, had betrayed the Divine Hall and come to Chang'an in person. How could the emperor and ministers of the Tang Empire allow him to leave safely again? The Chang'an local government and the Fish Dragon gang were not qualified to attend such a grand occasion. These bigwigs and their subordinates sat expressionlessly under the big umbrellas at the entrance and end of the alley. Because they did not know the situation in the old brush pen shop, no one walked over. Some people had already noticed a weirdo with a tall hat sitting under the gray wall opposite the old brush pen shop, and an extremely fat young man standing beside him. But after knowing their identities, no one dared to express any doubts. Time passed slowly, and the night was full of stars. Li Qingshan walked slowly from the entrance of the alley, walked to the two, and saluted with hands folded in front. He did not say anything, and just silently looked at the closed door of the old brush pen shop like the two. Sang did not know that there were so many unworldly powerhouses and secular bigwigs keeping watch for her outside the old brush pen shop. She just closed her eyes to sleep, thinking that she would not be so sad after falling asleep. She also thought that if the young master knew that the culprit who murdered his family was in the shop in front of him, he would be very sad. Sang thought like this in her half-asleep state, and then she had a dream. She dreamed of her biological parents. Sang did not know who her parents were, and she was very curious or missed this feeling. After all, Ning Ke was only 4 years older than her, and it was difficult for him to completely replace the existence that everyone needed. Until she met an old man in Chang'an, whose cotton-padded jacket was stained with hot and sour noodle slice soup. She felt very close to the old man, and it was a kind of natural closeness. From the old man's eyes, she saw unreasonable and completely unconditional love, just like Ning Quebec. So she thought that she met the existence like her parents, and she began to call him teacher. Sang woke up with a start, and her cheeks were slightly wet. It was silent all night, like a bean oil lamp gradually going out, and the morning light gradually brightened outside the door. No one from the Divine Hall came. You know the style of the empire. Master Yen Sei sighed and said, in Chang'an, we can't use the black cavalry to kill you. If people like us take action, it will only lead to misery and suffering. But the imperial court will not let you go, so now it is a deadlock. The old man was silent. He was very clear that since he was discovered by the Tang Empire today, they would certainly not allow him to escape again. Although he was the divine priest of light in the divine state, when a powerful empire came out with all its strength, he would still be in a desperate situation without the protection of Chang'an and its residents. I heard you said that you also gambled when you were in the shabby temple in the Kingdom of Song. Master Yen Sei looked at him and said calmly, let's make another bet. It's a bet of life and death. If you win, you can continue to look for the shadow of nightfall. If you lose, you have to leave your life in Chang'an. It can be regarded as an end to the old thing and comfort the thousands of innocent souls who died because of you. The old man was still silent. Master Yen Sei looked at his eyes and suddenly said, for the sake of your female disciple, gamble with me. The old man thoughtfully stood up and said, that makes sense. I admire you. It's worth it. There were 3 words in this sentence. Yen Sei did not hesitate to give up the god-stunning array of Chang'an as the background in order to seek a chance to fight. As the controller of the array, as long as Yen Sei was in Chang'an, he would naturally be in an invincible position. No matter how strong the opponent was, he could at least ensure his own safety. As long as it was for Sang Sang, it was worth it to do this gamble that involved life and death, as long as it was for Sang Sang. As for the reason, it was worth it. The old man was the light. If he wanted to keep the light in Sang Sang's world, he should make a choice that was truly light for the last time. In a word, everything was for Sang Sang. It was unreasonable for many people, but it was very reasonable for the old man. It was not worth it for many people, but it was very worthwhile for the old man. Sang Sang was a little black handmaiden. Her hair was a little yellow, not good-looking, not to mention beautiful. She looked very inconspicuous, and her temperament was not cute and pleasing. Those who did not know her would regard her as a piece of barnyard grass swaying in the cold wind that could be annihilated at any time. However, those who really knew her would treat her as a treasure. Up until now, only her young master Ning Ke and her teacher, the great divine priest of light, had known her. So when Prince Long Qing smiled and threatened her with words, Ning Ke anxiously pondered in silence by the Daming Lake and tried hard to break the realm. Then he shot the noble divine son of West Hill with an arrow without hesitation. When Wu Dao made her unhappy and tried to do something to her, great divine priest of light put down the yellow croaker on the table and went to the alley without thinking. He casually pointed at the monk from the unknown place and turned him into a blind man. The morning light came to Old Brush Pen Shop on Lin 47th Street in Chang'an. Master Yen Sei and Great Divine Priest of Light finally finished talking about the old days and negotiations hidden in their words. They decided to use a relatively simple way to resolve the current deadlock and write an end to the history of more than 10 years. The old man opened the shop door slowly with his old hand. He looked back and saw that Sang Sang had come behind him. She was half awake and half asleep all night. When there was a slight movement in the front shop, she woke up and rushed over. The old man looked at her quietly and suddenly said, "Do you want to have a look?" Sang Sang nodded hard. The old man glanced at Master Yen Sei. Master Yen Sei smiled and said, "She is indeed the best witness." The old man looked at Sang Sang's little face, paused for a moment and said with a smile, "Take the new urn. It has not been stewed with chicken soup, so there is no grease. It should be suitable to store ashes later." Hearing this, Master Yen Sei said, "If you have an old urn, take it with you. Speaking of which, you have earned a lot of money from my chicken soup calligraphy, but I haven't tasted your chicken soup yet." Sang Sang lowered her head and said softly, "If you don't go out, I will stew chicken soup for you today." The old man looked at her tenderly and shook his head. Then he looked at Yen Sei and said, "The old urn has grease, and the ashes are easy to stick to the wall." Master Yen Sei flicked his sleeves and walked out of the Old Brush Pen Shop with a big smile. He said, "My Taoist robe has always been greasy in my life, but I have never disliked it. Do you think I will care about whether the ashes will be stained by grease after I die?" Note, I really can't think of how to persuade second brother. I have spent more than an hour on this reason, but I still can't figure it out. I can't persuade such a stupid person. Why don't I just let him appear? That won't do. The Academy must have a firm stand on this occasion. Chen Pipi is not a good choice. In addition, no matter the new urn or the old one, they are all my favorite urns. This is the first chapter of today. On the first day of the month, please support the monthly vote. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 296. As the morning light came, Chang'an City slowly woke up from its sleep. The door of the old brush pen shop was pushed open, and those bigwigs in Lin 47th Street were immediately alert. It was colder this year than in previous years, but it had not snowed for many days. The remaining snow under the tree roots turned gray day after day. However, when the door was pushed open with a squeak, it began to snow. Second brother looked up at the sky, and then looked at the door that had just been opened. At the entrance of the alley, a black carriage slowly came in the wind and snow. The heavy body made of metal slightly trembled the bluestone in the alley, and the wheels made a low sound like thunder. Master Yen Sei and Great Divine Priest of Light walked out of the shop and sat in the carriage. A moment later, a thin figure also walked out of the old brush pen shop. Sang Sang held the new urn in her left arm and the old one in her right arm. It seemed to be a little heavy, and she struggled to climb into the carriage. The black carriage drove to the city gate in the wind and snow. It was still quiet in Lin 47th Street. The general at the head of the alley and the censor at the end of the alley did not move, and looked solemnly at the black carriage leaving. Second brother stood up from the stool, and with his hands behind his back, he walked to the city gate with Chen Pipi following the track of the black carriage. Until then, other bigwigs in the alley dared to move. The general ordered the Yulin royal guards hidden everywhere in Chang'an City to return to camp. The censor went straight to the palace to report. Nation Master Li Qingshan looked at the carriage gradually disappearing in the wind and snow of Chang'an, and slowly bowed to him. There was a not-so-famous mountain in the northern suburbs of Chang'an City. The mountain was not high, and there were no historical records of scholars to help it. The wild trees on the mountain also lacked some beauty, so there were few tourists on weekdays. This morning, the wind and snow came suddenly, and the road was covered with snow, and it was difficult to walk on. The mountain was even more quiet, as if it was not in the world. The black horse carriage stopped at the foot of this nameless mountain. The wheels of the carriage, which were made of refined iron, had already cracked the ground beneath them. If they were to forcefully ascend the mountain, they would probably leave 2 terrifying wounds on the muddy mountain path. 2 old men were walking on the mountain path. Their cotton-padded jackets were a little old, but they were very clean. They trembled slightly in the mountain wind. Their Taoist robes were still new, but they were stained with a lot of grease and dirt, fluttering in the wind. Regardless of whether it was their clothes or their slightly stooped old bodies, the 2 elders on the mountain path were very ordinary. However, when they walked through the wind and snow, they gave off a feeling of floating away from the world. At the foot of the mountain path, Sang Sang, who was thin and weak, held 2 heavy urns in her arms. She lowered her head and pursed her lips, staring at the endless stone steps under her skirt. She struggled to catch up with the 2 old people in front of her, who seemed to be about to leave the world. Master Yen Sei pulled out a snow branch from his face and sighed, "I don't know whether the new urn will be filled or the old one will become heavier." Great Divine Priest of Light walked beside him and said with a smile, "It's all up to Haotian." Master Yen Sei wiped the snow on his Taoist robe and said, "In fact, it's not bad to fill them all up." The Great Divine Priest of Light nodded and said, "Placing the 2 jars side by side can be considered as neighbors." Master Yen Sei turned his head and glanced at him. Then he put his sleeves behind him and continued to go up the stairs. Under a cedar tree, the 2 old people rested for a while, waiting for Sang Sang to catch up. Master Yen Sei looked at the calm face of the old man and suddenly asked curiously, "Have you ever been to Tianqi?" The great divine priest of light slightly squinted his old eyes and seemed to be thinking about things that happened many years ago. After a long silence, he said softly, "I have been there, but then I was beaten down to the dust and deprived of the opportunity to be close to Haotian." Master Yen Sei looked at him and said with emotion, "What a great lucky chance it is to break through the 5 states. How many cultivators in the world can't reach it in their whole lives? You actually reached this step more than 10 years ago. No wonder the Abbey Dean thought that you were the first person in Haotian Taoism." The great divine priest of light sighed softly and said, "It's actually a kind of pain to have seen it, but it can't be seen again." Sang Sang finally arrived under the cedar tree. Her face was red and she was out of breath. The 2 old people did not give her any time to rest and continued to walk up the stairs to the top of the mountain. Master Yen Sei said, "You have broken through the 5 states, but you were beaten down to the dust. This can only prove that Haotian thinks that what you have done is wrong, so he is determined to take back this gift. You have to pursue the shadow of the night, the son of Yama." In fact, does it have anything to do with the glory of Haotian? In fact, in the end, you believe in yourself, not Haotian. The great divine priest of light sighed and said, "In fact, in the past decades, I have been thinking about a question. Why do those excellent divine priests of light in the history of the Divine Hall often leave the Peach Mountain? Why do those who are said to be closest to Haotian often choose a road that Haotian doesn't appreciate?" The patriarch who founded the Devil's Doctrine 1,000 years ago and the predecessor who betrayed the sect hundreds of years ago were like this. Finally, I also embarked on this road. He turned to look at Yen Sei and said after a long silence, "I have thought about this for a long time. I was still thinking about every step when I was climbing the mountain. Until now, when I saw the red sun rising in the sea of clouds in front of me and saw the warm red light, I understood that it is because the person sitting on the divine priest of light believes in the light." Master Yen Sei was silent. He understood the meaning of the great divine priest of light's words. He believed in the light, but Haotian didn't necessarily represent the light. At this time, the 2 old men had climbed to the top of the nameless mountain. Sang Sang rested under a straight white poplar tree behind her. The old and new urns beside her reflected the ruddy luster of her slightly dark face, full of warmth. At the end of the sea of clouds in the east of the cliff, the rising sun had all jumped out, red and round. On the cliff, there was still fine snow floating. Watching the sun in the snow, it was really a strange picture. Walking to the edge of the cliff, Master Yen Southeast reached out to drive away a drifting snowflake in front of him. Looking at the red sun calmly smiling between the 2 layers of clouds in the east, he asked, "How does it feel to take that step?" Taking a step forward, one would enter the lower layer of white clouds lingering between the mountains, or walk into the warm light. The great divine priest of light walked to his side and looked at the distant sun side by side. He said, "After the battle between you and Lu Bai beside the sea wall of the Kingdom of Song, I saw the red sun gradually setting. I felt something, but I only took half a step forward. No matter it is half a step, you have taken it after all. I envy you very much." Master Yen Sei sighed and said, "No wonder Lu Bai looked at you so strangely that day. After all, I am still a guy who is slow to understand." The great divine priest of light recalled the shocking sword that broke the sky many years ago as if it came from thousands of miles away. Thinking of the earth-shaking talisman of the old Taoist priest beside him at that time, he could not help but smile slightly and said, "In principle, Lu Bai should have taken half a step forward. But I don't know why there is no news for so many years. Maybe he is afraid?" Master Yen Sei thought of the strongest person he had met in his life. He slightly frowned, but did not say anything. The great divine priest of light looked at him and said with a faint smile, "Many people think that you have broken the possibility of breaking the 5 states because you entered the Tao with pure yang. But I think there is always a new life in the end. Lu Bai is the strongest person in the world, but you can face him head-on and not be defeated." If he can cross it, there is no reason why you can't cross it. So, what about you? The mountain wind came with snow, blowing the loose Taoist robe. Master Yen Sei looked at the blue sky and the red sun between the clouds and said calmly, "Last year, when I became Ning Kei's disciple, all my obsessions turned into peace and my mind suddenly became open. At that time, I knew vaguely to take that step, but I don't know why I am not willing to take it." He looked at the great divine priest of light and said, "As you said about Lu Bai, because of fear." The great divine priest of light frowned in the morning light. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Why are you afraid?" When talisman Taoism goes to the end, it is the truth of heaven and earth, the most essential law. I have been cultivating talisman all my life, which is gradually going to the original. However, the extreme is the area that Haotian is qualified to touch. Master Yen Sei said expressionlessly, "When cultivating talisman Taoism, it is inevitable to touch the forbidden area. It is about self-revelation, not Tianqi. So what will happen when you break the 5 states? This is fear." The morning sun was calmly watching the cliff from the distant end of the sea of clouds. The light was so red and warm, illuminating the stone snow trees and urns on the edge of the cliff. That was the benevolent and generous Haotian giving rules and life to the human world. The great divine priest of light said, "Although I seem to have betrayed Haotian, I am cultivating divine skills after all. The glory of Haotian will give me eyes to see through everything in the world and endless power. I have the advantage in the daytime." Master Yen Sei shook his head and said, "Chang'an is my home. I have walked all the streets in the city and traveled all the great rivers and mountains outside the city. This mountain is my talisman, so you don't have much advantage." The great divine priest of light smiled and said, "In any case, it is better not to disturb the people's dreams." Master Yen Sei said, "Since I advise you to leave Chang'an, this is the reason." As soon as he finished speaking, his wide sleeves waved gently. With a flash of clear light, the oil stains and the unpleasant smell in the sleeves were suddenly purified. A strong and inexplicable talisman intent slowly seeped out from the cracks in the mountain rocks. "I haven't seen the mountain Fu for many years," the great divine priest of light said with emotion. He stretched out his right hand and gently waved it in the wind and snow. The morning light from the east instantly turned his skinny right hand into a pure white jade. Countless weak specks of light scattered from his fingers and flew into the air like fireflies. When the strong talisman intent seeping out from the mountain rocks touched these holy light spots, there was no terrible result. Instead, they nestled together intimately and slowly drifted down from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the cliff, gradually forming an invisible barrier. The 7-colored flowing light flowed on the barrier, like a beautiful rainbow in the snow. The 2 old men looked at the rainbow cover in front of them that covered the whole mountain, feeling the harmony and strength in it. They were very satisfied and nodded, and then looked at the silent little girl behind them at the same time. The next chapter is about 5 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 297. In an abandoned pavilion a few miles away, second senior brother looked indifferently in the direction of the mountain. Just a moment ago, the mountain suddenly disappeared. Whether it was seen with the naked eye or perceived, it no longer existed. Standing behind second senior brother, Chen Pippi scratched his head anxiously as his heart itched. Great divine priest of light and Master Yen Sei were 2 super powerhouses at the peak of the knowing destiny state and even half a step beyond the 5 states. It was not easy to see. In the past decades, except for the storms that youngest uncle once cut with his sword, there were only a few. How could he not be curious? There was nothing but wind and snow over there, but second brother still looked at that place with an indifferent expression, as if he could see everything clearly. His eyes did not emit crystal light, but were filled with a very serious and righteous aura. Wherever his eyes passed, all the wind, snow, and leaves avoided him in fear. Chen Pipi knew that second brother could see the movement on the mountain, so he nervously rubbed his hands and asked, "Senior brother, what's the situation now? Did they fight? Sang Sang should be fine, right? Otherwise, I can't explain to youngest brother." Second brother slightly frowned and impatiently said, "Shut up and watch." Chen Pipi immediately shut up and thought bitterly, "How can I watch it if I can't see it?" Master Yen Sei took out something from his arms and solemnly handed it to Sang Sang, and then said a few words. Great Divine Priest of Light looked at Sang Sang tenderly, gently put an ID token in her hand, and then touched her head. At this time, what was said were all last words, and what was told were all things after. But no one knew who said the last words and who would really leave a lot of things for Sang Sang to deal with. Master Yen Sei walked to the edge of the cliff and closed his eyes to meditate. Great Divine Priest of Light walked to the other side of the cliff and calmly looked at the morning sun in the snow. Master Yen Sei opened his eyes. Great Divine Priest of Light withdrew his eyes. Master Yen Sei looked at the calm face of his old friend and suddenly laughed. He stretched out his right hand and gently waved his sleeve. Intentionally or unintentionally, a big talisman was formed. The talisman was so powerful that it could not be described. Being called by the talisman, thousands of rocks floated from the ground and densely covered the air, like countless huge solidified raindrops. His slender fingers, which seemed to have the plump and tender feeling of a girl from the House of Red Sleeves, slightly trembled, and the mountain talisman moved. The mountain rocks that seemed to have solidified all over the mountain whistled down, and it was like a vast rainstorm on a summer night that struck the mountain with a bang. This talisman made of the cliff clothes stretched between heaven and earth, and it had begun to spread around the bright lines to show its contempt, disdain and pride, because it was the most powerful Jing Fu. The well was the system of sealing fields. It had the meaning of ancient rites and the beginning of wonderful theories. But the simplest and most powerful Jing character intent was a simple line cutting, the kind of balanced and perfect cutting of space, the cutting of heaven and earth. The Jing Fu fell on the cliff, and the cutting lines, no matter big or small, all went deep and subtle. The rocks rolling between the cliff were all broken into powder. The grass and trees shrinking between the cliff were all broken into powder. The snowflakes fluttering over the cliff were all broken into powder. The cold wind passing through the cliff was all broken into powder. Finally, the cliff was broken. The omnipresent light also became dim and fragmented because of the fragmentation of space. This was the ultimate state of talisman Taoism pursued by Master Yen Sei. The talisman on the cliff was the one that had the true unwavering will. Not only could it cut through everything in the world, but it could even cut through space. It was thousands of times stronger than the talisman that Wang Jinglu had encountered on the rainy night of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. The light always needed space to walk. When the space was broken, how could it shine? The great divine priest of light looked at the countless thin lines in front of him and sighed in his heart. He knew that at this moment, Yen Sei finally stopped thinking about other problems and took the first step beyond the 5 states. The talisman Taoism that had the ability to make Haotian's divine light dim and even break had gone beyond the scope of Haotian's permission. His cotton sleeves had been cut into pieces, and the cotton had also been cut into pieces by the talisman. There was a glittering light outside the skin of his arm, which had become thinner and thinner under the powerful Jing Fu. But his bare arm pointed to the sky in the east, and his index finger was burning with bright divine light, which was very firm and persistent. Perhaps it was his firm and persistent belief in the light that moved the creator of the heavens above. The great divine priest of light seemed to understand something. He looked at the clouds quietly, and his deep eyes were crystal clear. His old cheeks were full of tears, and he murmured, "Thank Haotian for giving me strength." The sun outside the clouds suddenly shone brightly. A majestic force passed through the snow and clouds, ignoring the distance and the broken space between the cliff, and directly poured into his old body. There is another chapter today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 298. That vast, irresistible, and perhaps even glorious, tremendous power descended from the heavens and entered the human body. Without any experience or preparation, the relatively small and fragile human body would have been directly shattered into countless shards of light by that power, or turned into an idiot in bewilderment. But this situation was not strange to the great divine priest of light. Many years ago, he had taken that step and understood the revelation of Haotian. He understood that as long as he opened his heart and body in all aspects, he could get the most precious gift that Haotian gave to human beings, so that he could use this power that should not appear in the human world. The great divine priest of light's crystal deep eyes calmly watched everything between the cliffs, as if he could see every line of Jing Fu cutting the space. The divine light around his index finger had become a mass of solid white light. The beautiful and holy milky white light exuded an unimaginably horrible aura. Countless rays of pure white light spread out from his fingers. Some hung down like umbrellas, protecting his body, but even more pierced out like sunlight, piercing into the space that had been cut into countless pieces. After the light pierced into the space fragments, the fragments suddenly became bright. The horrible aura contained in the light supported the lines on the edge, so that the space would not continue to be broken. Master Yen Sei used the powerful talisman meaning beyond the 5 states to cut the space into pieces. The great divine priest of light forcibly maintained the existence of the space with the power of Tianqi. Tens of thousands of pieces of bright broken space were like tens of thousands of tiny mirrors. The images of the cliffs, the air, the snow, the flowers, and the trees appeared in the mirrors. Although they were all broken pictures that had no connection after being cut, they still existed. On the edge of tens of thousands of bright mirrors, the lines of cutting were slightly trembling. If these lines collapsed, the power of light would break through the shackles of cutting and return to the real and complete world. If these lines continued to cut into the fine parts, then the space would continue to be broken. No matter what kind of aura of light it was filled with, it could only gradually dim in the end. The talisman meaning borrowed from the aura of heaven and earth, or the power of light borrowed from Haotian, which was more powerful? Talisman Taoism was the truth that human beings understood from heaven and earth and mastered the deepest law of the world. Light was the reward or punishment that Haotian gave to the world. Who would win? Everything on the cliff, including the cliff itself, had been cut apart. Supported by Haotian's indifferent aura of light, it did not turn into green smoke. Only a tree was not shattered and sealed in the bright mirror. It was a tall white poplar tree, and a little girl was squatting under it. The little girl held an old urn in her left hand and a new one in her right. She trembled slightly in the light and talisman between the cliffs, like a grass shivering in the cold wind. A piece of snow that escaped from nowhere landed on her shoulder. She picked up the piece of snow and felt it slowly melt between her fingers. Looking at the scene, her willowy eyes grew brighter and brighter, but her pupils grew darker. Her black pupils seemed to be able to see the essence of light. The battle between a divine talisman master beyond the 5 states and a great light in the Tianqi state had no specific form or picture in the real world. However, both the old man and Master Yen Sei used their consciousness to seal the white poplar and the little girl under it out of the space, so she was a real bystander. Therefore, this battle that could not be understood by the secular world was portrayed into a picture that could be understood by human beings after falling into Sang Sang's black eyes. Those pictures were extremely beautiful and also extremely frightening. The majestic aura, the sacred light, the fearless heaven and earth, and the talisman meaning, they cut and hurt each other, snuggled and struggled. The space compressed the light, and the light broke through the space, and finally compressed and condensed into the stars in the dark night sky, into the silent flowing fire in the wilderness, and into the spring reflected on the dewdrops. Then all the pictures disappeared in Sang Sang's eyes. They were invisible and formless, and even did not exist. There was absolute darkness and silence, darker than the darkest night, darker than the darkest clouds, just like the pupils of Yama. If it were any other ordinary girl, she would have fainted from the shock, but Sang Sang didn't. She didn't know what had happened. She couldn't understand what had happened on the cliff, but she still tried her best to open her eyes wide. She watched and waited quietly. She wanted to see everything that she could see and remember everything that she could remember, because she knew that Ning Kei would want to know what had happened today in the future. In the absolute darkness, a tiny light spot suddenly appeared, and then the light spot suddenly erupted into countless beams of light particles, breaking through the whole space in an instant, like the birth of a new world. It was also like countless beautiful fireworks blooming in the night sky. Looking at those beautiful fireworks, Sang Sang rubbed her eyes confusedly. When she opened her eyes again, she found that everything that had happened had disappeared, and the cliffs came back to her. The rainbow inhibition that covered the nameless mountain disappeared without a trace. Snowflakes fell again. On the edge of the cliff stood two old men looking up at the sky. At this time, they finally became real old men, and they coughed when the cold wind passed through the cliff's blue. Master Yen Sei raised his arm and wiped his nose with his sleeve. He looked at the sky and murmured, "So that's what happened." The right sleeve of the great divine priest of light's cotton-padded jacket had become nothing. He put his right arm into the left sleeve, squatted down like an old farmer, and slightly squinted his eyes to look at somewhere in the sky. Master Yen Sei pointed to somewhere in the north, and said to the old man beside him, "I saw an unprecedented big talisman." The big talisman only had two simple strokes, starting from the north of the wilderness, one in the west, and the other in the east. Then he looked back at Chang'an City, which he had silently guarded for many years, and sighed with emotion, "We met here." At that moment, he surpassed the 5 states of cultivation and even went further. He clearly saw the world on the other side, the real future. Therefore, he knew that the unprecedented talisman was real. It was something that humans could really write. Therefore, he was extremely happy and moved. The great divine priest of light squatted on the edge of the cliff and looked to the north along with his hand. He saw something different. He, who had really entered the Tianqi state, understood a lot of things that he could not understand before. The old man looked back at Sang Sang under the poplar tree, and his old face showed a hesitant and struggling expression. Finally, he was relieved and understood. He smiled and said, "It turns out that this is my lucky chance." Master Yen Sei looked down at him and laughed. He said, "You still can't see it at this time? No matter what kind of lucky chance it is not our business, but their business." The old man stood up, sighed and said with a smile, "Yes, it will be their world in the future." Many days ago, an old man was taken in by a little handmaiden in the old brush pen shop. At that time, the old man asked the little handmaiden a question. "Do you believe in lucky chance?" "I believe in lucky chance. I believe that everyone is destined to meet some people and do some things. These things arranged by Haotian are lucky chances. Many years ago, I saw the shadow of nightfall fall in this city. Once I saw it, I met it. Since I met it, I could no longer be separated. But I didn't see it clearly. What I met was not specific. I only knew that it existed, but I didn't know where it was. Then I saw a man in Chang'an who was born with knowledge. I felt that it was wrong, because there should not be a man in the world who was born with knowledge. So my lucky chance with him began. Many days later, standing on the edge of the cliff on the outskirts of Chang'an, the old man realized that his lucky chance was not with that man, but with the little handmaiden named Sang Sang. A gust of winter wind blew, and the two old men standing side by side on the edge of the cliff instantly turned into ashes like snow. For hundreds of years, the most outstanding great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace left this world peacefully. He was so talented and omnipotent that he could be called the most powerful man in the Peach Mountain. But he was imprisoned for 14 years because of the so-called lucky chance. He escaped from the Peach Mountain and came to Chang'an, but he couldn't find the shadow of nightfall. It seemed that this trip was just to meet Sang Sang and accept her as his successor. At the moment before his death, he received a revelation from Haotian. Finally, for the first time, he clearly saw what the shadow of nightfall looked like. He saw that his successor would inherit him and shine in the world. So he left with peace of mind. For hundreds of years, the most outstanding divine talisman master of Haotian Taoism also left this world peacefully. He laughed and scolded and played in the world without any false reputation. But he was the first powerful man who surpassed the 5 states by virtue of talisman Taoism. Master Yen Sei lived a carefree and casual life. He was just looking for a successor. When he met the chicken soup calligraphy, he finally got his long-cherished wish. It seemed that he lingered in the brothel all his life just to accept that guy as his successor. At the moment before his death, he saw through the reincarnation of light and darkness and saw the big talisman. He knew that his successor Ning Kei would definitely write a big talisman that he had never written in his life. He knew that the guy would definitely be able to accomplish what countless talisman masters wanted to accomplish. So he left with peace of mind and even happiness. The wind blew and the snow stopped. It was quiet on the cliff. The lonely white poplar looked at the sky. The lonely Sang Sang wiped her eyes and struggled to walk to the edge of the cliff with 2 heavy urns in her arms. Then she knelt in front of the 2 piles of ashes. The wind on the cliff kept blowing, and the 2 piles of ashes were blown everywhere. Many of them had already been blown into the air, onto the snowy ground, and even further away. Sang Sang knelt on the ground and held out her hands to put the ashes into the urns. My teacher lives in the new urn. He likes cleanliness. Young master's teacher lives in the old urn. He is not afraid of oil. She reminded herself softly. She put the ashes of the 2 old people into the urns one by one. The annoying mountain wind disturbed her from time to time. The ashes were blown everywhere, even on her cotton skirt and small face. Sang Sang raised the back of her hand to wipe her face. Then she lowered her head and continued to put ashes into the urns. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 299. In the abandoned pavilion, second brother quietly looked at the disappearing mountain in the distance. There was no extra emotion on his face, only calmness and silence. His ancient hat was upright like a peak, and his hands were behind his back like clouds. Soon after, in the space where the disappearing mountain was, countless dark clouds suddenly gathered, and snowflakes danced wildly. Then, some transparent and invisible things vaguely appeared in the distance. The invisible barrier was overflowing with colorful lights, and it was extremely beautiful. Then, countless stars could be vaguely seen twinkling in it. After an unknown amount of time, the twinkling stars suddenly disappeared, and the space where the snow gathered turned pitch black. The order and rules there seemed to have become static, or it could be said that the time had come to an end. A bolt of lightning struck down from the sky. This bolt of lightning tore through the space for a very long distance, and was as thick as a river. However, there was no sound of thunder, nor any color, but it was extremely pure and milky white. The earth trembled slightly, and the dark space suddenly collapsed. The mountain peak that had disappeared inexplicably reappeared in the world. 2 majestic and powerful auras ran side by side. After the clouds outside the mountain peak were torn into pieces by these two auras, they slowly accelerated according to an unknown pattern and gradually turned into a huge cloud vortex. Second brother silently looked at that place, and after a long time, he sincerely praised, "This is the real Tao." Standing behind second brother, Chen Pipi looked at the cloud vortex at the waist of the mountain, and felt that every inch of his skin was a little numb. He carefully sensed the two powerful breaths that were slowly disappearing, and murmured in shock, "They actually broke through the 5 states? This is really incredible. How did they do it? If they can take one step, they can take countless steps. At that moment, who knows how many steps they have taken above the 5 states?" Second brother slightly frowned, and then walked towards the mountain. Since the mountain had reappeared in the world, it could be climbed. The muddy mountain path seemed to have been altered by the great sculptor of time, making it hard and untouchable. The splashes of mud and the pits formed by the crushed mud were like stone sculptures lying quietly on the ground. Even the smallest details could be seen clearly. Thus, it gave off a completely different feeling from usual. Stepping on the mountain path was like stepping on the beautiful rivers and mountains and the history of mankind. Since the mountain was still there, the top and the cliff were naturally still there, but it seemed to be reorganized by some kind of power, and became a new existence. The cliff stones were broken into white powder, and it was as fine as the beach of the South Sea. Only a poplar tree was intact, and stood there alone. It should have grown in the cold peak of the cold plain, but now it appeared on the beach of the sea. So it was ridiculous. She was kneeling on the edge of the cliff, and was constantly putting the remaining ashes on the ground into 2 urns beside her. Her little hands were very carefully, and her slender fingers were gently digging the cracks on the ground. She gently scraped the edges of her palms, and then she held the urns carefully. She pursed her lips, but did not cry. She opened her eyes widely, and repeated the action mechanically and numbly. Even her bright eyes were not filled with sadness. This was the first scene that second brother and Chen Pipi saw when they reached the top of the mountain. This scene would stay in their hearts for a long time, and make them support the protagonist of this painting in some aspects without any reason. Walking to the edge of the cliff, second brother looked at the floating clouds in front of him, and reached out his hand to feel the 2 auras that were about to completely disappear. He glanced at the little handmaiden whose skirt was hanging on the ground, and said, "Let them stay here. This is my teacher." Sang Sang shook her head and said, pointing to the new urns. She pointed to the old urns and said, "This is young master's teacher." Then she lowered her head and said, "Young master must want to know what my teacher looks like, and he must want to see his teacher again. So I have to bring them back to young master, and I can't let them be blown away by the wind." In the Taoist hall deep in the Southern Gate Temple, Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, stared at the reflection on the dark-colored paulownia floor in a daze. He did not notice how pale and haggard his face was, because at this time there was only that wretched and ridiculous face in his eyes. He knew that he would never see that face again. Although he sometimes felt helpless and even a little tired of that face in the past years, he still fell into great sorrow at this time. Was it because of his senior brother's slutty behavior, or because he was always like a child in front of him? Li Qingshan looked at the reflection on the floor and smiled bitterly. People only knew that he was the nation master of Haotian South School Temple, but few people knew about his senior brother. However, it was his senior brother who helped him block Liu Bai's sword. Now that the great divine priest of light came to Chang'an, it was still his senior brother who stood in front of him. "Master, drink the medicine." He Mingqi raised the medicine tray over his head. He knew that his master was very sad at this time, but as a disciple, he had to protect his master's health, especially at such a sad moment. "Put it down." Li Qingshan restrained his pain and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I'll drink it later." He Mingqi put down the medicine tray and silently withdrew from the Daoist hall. Outside the doorway, he picked up the yellow paper umbrella and tucked it under his armpit. After a few steps, he was surrounded by the Taoist priests and nuns in the snowy garden. The death of Master Yen Sei might not cause a ripple among the people, because not many people knew his name. However, these Taoist priests of the southern school were different. Their faces were full of sadness and anger. A Taoist nun asked in a trembling voice, "How could that person hide in Chang'an for so long?" It was still snowing outside the courtyard of the military ministry. The sky was gloomy as if Haotian was angry. The atmosphere in the room was depressed like the gloomy sky. The generals' faces were full of anger and shame. How could that person hide in Chang'an for so long? The one who asked in a low voice was Defender General of the State Su Shi of the Tang Empire. After receiving the secret order from His Majesty, he returned to Chang'an at an unimaginable speed. However, when he entered the city gate at noon, he heard the shocking news. Among the military generals who had the qualifications to cooperate with Master Yen Sei, now he was the only one left in the whole world, the first person in the military of the empire. So this news made him angry and more painful. Defender General Su Shi's face was so gloomy that it seemed to drip water. He looked at the crowd and said in a cold voice, "Just this morning, one of the pillars of the Tang Empire fell. I don't care who the enemy is. I only know that His Majesty gave you dozens of days, but you failed to find and kill him." The generals in the room lowered their heads. Some wanted to refute that it should be the negligence of the Imperial Center Administration. However, facing the angry face of Defender General of the State Su Shi and the strong sense of honor deep in their hearts as soldiers of the Tang Empire, they didn't say anything. Don't try to shirk the responsibility, unless you forget your identity. You are soldiers. The land under your feet is the capital of the Tang Empire, Chang'an. Therefore, you have the obligation to ensure the safety here. Instead of letting a person old enough to be your grandfather take the risk to fight. He looked at Defender General of Huaihua and said sternly, "Why didn't you take the initiative to attack at that time?" Defender General of Huaihua stood up, lowered his head and said shamefully, "His Majesty strictly ordered to ensure the safety of the residents of Chang'an. If we used the armored black cavalry, it would be too shocking. Moreover, the opponent was too strong." Su Shi slightly narrowed his eyes and suddenly shouted angrily, "Is the great divine priest of West Hill so great? You are scared out of your wits, so you can only hide like mice and watch coldly like onlookers. When have the Tang Empire's soldiers been so timid? Have there been less cultivators in the knowing destiny state who fell under the soldiers' arrows on the battlefield?" After saying this, he coughed violently and painfully until he couldn't stand up. Defender General's gray hair fluttered in the wind and the wrinkles around his eyebrows were very deep. The generals in the hall knew that this was the beginning of the general's lung disease. They couldn't help but feel ashamed and anxious. They hurriedly called for the medical officer to come in and treat him. Su Shi struggled to straighten up and looked at the generals with a stern expression. He said, "I don't blame you for what happened this morning. After all, it was the South Gate Temple and the Academy who attacked first. But I really want to know how Wei Guangming could hide in Chang'an for so many days and why no one in the Tang Empire could find him. What on earth happened? Investigate carefully. If the military is lazy or timid, kill them all. If it's the Imperial Center Administration or the South Gate Temple, report to me. I will ask for the imperial decree to kill them and bury them with Master Yen Sei." The general's painful coughs and angry shouts intertwined for a long time. There were 4 magnificent Taoist temples on the top of Peach Mountain closest to the sky. When there was no worship ceremony, no one was allowed to come close. Even the divine priests were rarely seen. It seemed empty, quiet, and indifferent. In the dark temple near the edge of the cliff, there was a painful cough. The confinement of the great divine priest of judgment was broken by the great divine priest of light and was injured until now. At this time, when he heard the news of that person's death, he was so emotional that he coughed. There was no sound in the divine hall of revelation, only silence. The White Temple, which was relatively the simplest, was completely silent. Because the great divine priest of light who was supposed to be in the temple had not sat on the throne for nearly 15 years, and he would never come back again. A sigh was heard from the pristine white divine hall at the highest point. It was a soft sigh, but it resounded throughout the Peach Mountain like thunder. Then, it became silent all of a sudden. After an unknown period of time, the majestic voice rang out again. How can the successor of light wander in the mortal world? He should be taken back to Taoism. On a nameless island in the far south, a Taoist in indigo stood on a high reef, silently looking at the boiling sea in front of him. He had been watching the sea here for many days, but he did not know what mysteries he had seen. One day, he felt something and turned to look at the mainland. He frowned slightly and said softly, "What on earth did you see? How much of your light will the successor you have found be able to inherit? How much lucky chance does he have? Is this wine? Does it deserve to be called wine?" In a small remote county of Gushan Commandery, an extremely angry voice sounded in an inconspicuous wine shop near the street. The one who shouted hoarsely and accused the bad tavern was a tall old man whose face was completely red. He wore a purple lamb skin robe and a black overcoat. The material seemed to be extremely expensive, but it was unknown whether it was because it had been weathered for a long time or because of other reasons, but the old man always felt a little old when he wore it. The wine shop owner was a very strong middle-aged man. He stared at the old man in front of him and spat on the ground fiercely. He said disdainfully, "This is the most famous Jiujiang double-distilled wine in Gushan Commandery." "What? You have a problem with that?" The old man angrily lifted the wine bag in his hand and spat everywhere. He said, "Do you think I have never drunk good wine? How can Jiujiang double-distilled wine be as bland as your wine?" The wine shop owner stared at him and pushed him away. He scolded, "I'm giving you face because you are a little old. Don't take it. My double-distilled wine is so bland. What can you do?" The old man trembled with anger. He rolled up his sleeves and was ready to step forward. He shouted, "I can tolerate the taste of chicken soup stewed into white vinegar. But how can I neglect the wine? If I can tolerate it, I can't." After a moment, the old man was beaten out of the wine shop. His originally meticulously combed hair was now a mess, and the black cloak on his body was torn into several large holes. He looked extremely miserable. The old man stood on the street and shouted at the wine shop, "Country bumpkin, I have to wait for the old man to come out before I dare to come out. You filthy things don't even know the principle of respecting the old and respecting the wise. How could a shop that sold fake wine understand such a profound principle?" Immediately, a few shop assistants carrying sticks rushed out. The old man screamed and ran away with his head in his hands. He ran faster than the young people. Even though he ran in a hurry, he still held the wine bag tightly in his hand. It seemed that even the worst wine was better than nothing. He ran out of the county and came to a dilapidated Taoist temple. An old yellow bull was eating grass in boredom. Probably because grass was not as delicious as fish or mutton, it was extremely tired and kicked its front hooves angrily from time to time. Seeing the old man run back to the Taoist temple in embarrassment, the old yellow bull raised its head and mooed, as if laughing at him. The old man opened the wine bag and drank 2 mouthfuls. When his breathing gradually stopped, he could not help but shake his head and sigh that people's hearts were not what they used to be. Then he walked to the stone steps of the temple and picked up a piece of firewood to dig into the ashes of the dying fire. 2 pieces of potatoes were dug out from the ashes and rolled on the ground. The old yellow bull walked over and looked at the old man attentively and affectionately. The old man was furious. He pointed at the 2 burnt potatoes with the firewood and shouted, "I told you to watch the fire, I told you to watch the fire. Can you still eat them after they've been burnt to ashes? Can you still call them potatoes? In the far north, in the Tianqi Mountains deep in the wilderness. In the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, which had been forgotten for many years." Ning Ke woke up, but he could not remember what had happened. He looked around the dark room blankly and found that the hill made of white skeletons had collapsed into rubble. There were only 2 iron chains left where the old monk was, and the front end of the chains was a pile of ashes. Then he remembered everything and his body suddenly relaxed. However, looking at the pile of ashes, he did not know why there was an inexplicable sadness in his heart. "Thank you. I will continue to work hard to write the story. Please continue to support me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 300. Ning Ke looked at his black and dirty hands. He could not see any difference from before. He clenched his fists and did not notice any difference in his body. At least his arms were still as thick as before, and he did not become one of those legendary green-painted monsters with infinite strength. However, he knew that something must have changed during the time he was unconscious. The aura and the mottled sword marks on the surrounding stone walls had disappeared without a trace, and the chi of heaven and earth in the room had returned to a normal level. The aura that had been injected into his body at the beginning must have calmed down after it finished training his body. He silently used his psyche power to check the movements in his body and found that the snow mountain and ocean of chi still existed. The broad passage from the ocean of chi to the snow mountain had also stabilized. The lower end of the passage between the internal organs led to a certain place in his lower abdomen, condensing into a very dim ball of light in front of the snow mountain. With the agitation of his psyche power, hundreds of auras similar to the chi of heaven and earth were released from there. They followed the trajectory of his meridians and dispersed into every bone and every pore. When the chi of heaven and earth that had been stored in the depths of his lower abdomen dispersed around, Ning Ke felt as if he had soaked in a hot spring with just the right temperature. His body was warm, but it did not make him feel tired. Instead, it stimulated his spirit and made his 5 senses much sharper. He looked at the mottled sword marks on the roof that seemed to have lost their lives. His mind moved along with the direction of the sword marks. The warm and even somewhat hot aura moved quickly in his meridians. Then, he gradually felt that there were some extremely fine aura fragments in the air that entered his body along with his breathing. The speed at which the chi of heaven and earth entered his body was very slow. It was much slower than the speed at which the aura in youngest uncle's sword marks entered his body when he first joined the devil. However, he was very clear that if he did not forget to cultivate youngest uncle's great spirit, the chi of heaven and earth in nature would continue to enter his body. No matter how slow the speed was, as time passed, his state of strength would continue to increase. Is this joining the devil? However, if I keep taking from heaven and earth like this, endlessly taking and strengthening myself, when will it stop? Is that why I can't take? Is that why they're called demons? Ning Ke slowly lowered his head and silently sensed the path and way of the aura in his body. His dirty face was full of confusion and faint fear of the unknown. His cotton clothes, which were stained with blood, oil, and dust, seemed to have sensed his emotions and became stiff and cringed, wrinkled and ugly. It was quiet in the room. Suddenly, he remembered something important and woke up with a start. He used the fastest and most inconspicuous method to get out of the state of cultivating great spirit and walked to the corner of the room. Mo Shanshan's black hair, which was as messy as a summer waterfall, was scattered on her cotton dress. After a dangerous battle, her white cotton dress was already covered in dust and blood, but for some reason, it still gave off a clean smell in the dark room. Ning Kai squatted beside the girl and felt the clean aura from her body. Looking at her black hair and white dress, he somehow felt dirty and did not dare to touch her body. This strange emotion was quickly thrown away by him. He gently helped the young talisman master to sit properly and took out some medicine from his arms to carefully feed her. Then, he gently patted her back to help her disperse the medicine. After some time, Mo Shanshan finally woke up. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly on her pale face due to the loss of blood. She opened her eyes and revealed a nervous and even a little timid expression. When she fainted, the battle in the room was still going on. She did not know who won and even thought that Ning Kai and herself had fallen into the hands of the old monk and become his food like Yi Hongyu. It was not until she saw that the old monk had turned into ashes that Mo Shanshan was slightly relieved. She panted and held Ning Kai's hand tightly. Her body trembled slightly and it seemed that she could not forget what she had experienced in her mind. Ning Kai's hand was tightly held by her and even faintly painful. He did not express any objection and only hugged her silently, patting her back gently to comfort her. Suddenly, he frowned slightly and pulled his hand out from Mo Shanshan's hand. Mo Shanshan looked up at him and did not know what had happened. She looked a little absent-minded and uneasy. Ning Kai helped her to sit by the wall and picked up his padao from the ground. He silently walked to the opposite side. It was unknown when the Tao addict had woken up from her coma. She was leaning against the wall and looking at them indifferently. That pure and charming beautiful face looked a little pitiful because of the serious injury and blood loss. However, Ning Kai knew how powerful and terrifying the other party was and would not be softened by these external appearances. Looking at Ning Kai who was approaching her step by step with the padao, Yi Hongyu's indifferent eyes were filled with self-mockery and contempt. She bent her right hand that was weakly hanging by her thigh with difficulty and pinched her index and middle fingers together to pinch a sword formula. However, just as her psyche power was about to be released, a mouthful of black sticky blood spurted from her lips and landed on her dress that was already stained with blood. It added another color to the various hideous red stains. Yi Hongyu looked at the blood dripping from her dress and smiled with a complicated expression. Then, she gave up on her anger and leaned against the wall tiredly. Both her movements and her expression were so weak. Among the three of them, she had suffered the most serious injury. First, her sense of perception had been directly shattered. Then, Master Lotus had used the Tao Tai demonic skill twice. Finally, she had forcefully lowered her state in exchange for a stunning blow. She was no longer as powerful and proud as she was in the snow-capped peak. However, when she looked at Ning Kai who was walking towards her, there was no other emotion in her eyes. There was no anger, no begging, no despair, no sadness. Even the contempt and self-mockery at the beginning had all disappeared. There was only calmness. Ning Kai stood in front of her with his padao and looked at her eyes silently and attentively. There was no such thing as not taking advantage of someone when they were in a precarious situation in his dictionary. He would do anything to ensure that they could survive and live a better life. Therefore, he believed that if he did not take action when the enemy was in danger, he would definitely be punished by heaven. This girl who was leaning against the wall and looked so weak that she seemed like she could die at any moment was not an ordinary girl. She was the most powerful Tao addict among the younger generation of Haotian Taoism and his enemy. How could he forget the scene outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine when he used the primordial 13 arrows and the divine talisman that his teacher had left for him but still could not defeat her? Instead, he was beaten like a dog by her. If he did not kill Yi Hongyu now, would she not kill him after she recovered her state? Strangely, Ning Kai did not pick up the padao and directly pierce through her chest. Instead, he looked at her silently for a long time. He looked at the two tragic and terrifying wounds on her shoulders and arms. He thought about how the missing flesh and blood had already been swallowed by the old monk and then turned into a part of the pile of ashes. The sharp tip of the slender and long padao pierced into the cracks of the stone slabs like a spider web. If it was in the past, I would definitely kill you. Ning Kai looked at her and said seriously. Due to some very complicated reasons, he had made a difficult decision. It was because if the Tao addict had not risked her life, he would have died when he was comprehending the youngest uncle's sword style. It was because Mo Shanshan had whispered something behind him. It was because he did not care about the wrath of heaven. It was because he finally confirmed that she had fainted at the last stage of the battle and did not hear the conversation about joining the devil between him and Lotus. Since we have fought side by side, I think at least in the front gate of the devil's doctrine, we are comrades. I don't care about reputation like most Tangs, but I am a soldier of the Tang Empire. I don't have the habit of killing comrades on the battlefield. So if you agree that we are comrades here, then we can talk about any problems outside. Yi Hongyu looked at Ning Kai's face calmly. It was not a long time, but it felt like a long time. She was very clear that Ning Kai's temperament was very similar to hers. He was a man who would do anything to achieve his goals. So she was ready to welcome death. However, she did not expect him to make such a choice. She was the intelligent Tao addict and the Grand Master of the Judicial Department who maintained justice in Haotian Taoism. So she did not say that he would regret it if he did not kill her now like other stupid female villains. Instead, she looked at Ning Kai and said seriously, I saved your life before, and you saved mine later. So we are equal. If you don't kill me now, then I will return the favor when I come to kill you in the future. Ning Kai nodded and said, sounds fair. Deal. After saying this, he put down his slender padao and squatted down in front of Yi Hongyu. He stretched out his hand to tear off her skirt, wanting to check on her injuries. But his actions were a little rough and he did not pity her at all. Yi Hongyu looked at his fingers caressing her naked shoulders. She frowned and could not help showing disgust in her eyes. But she said calmly, I know you mean well, but I hate men who touch my body. This is an uncontrollable instinct. If you are not happy, you can treat my disgust as joy. Ning Kai lowered his head and focused on the two horrifying wounds. He looked at the faintly visible white bones and shook his head. He did not care about the disgust in her eyes at all and said, it's not a good thing to be liked by you. You'd better hate me. I just have to tell you that your wounds seem to be a little troublesome. Yi Hongyu did not hesitate and asked directly, what do you want? You are indeed the Tao addict. You are indeed straightforward. Ning Kai looked at her pale side profile and said very seriously, it will cost me money to treat your wounds. If the great divine priest of judgment asks how Long Qing was disabled in the future, can you put in a good word for me? I'm not asking you to lie. I'm just asking you to describe the scene of the accident objectively. It was because Long Qing threatened Sang Sang that he had been thinking hard about breaking the realm by the Daming Lake. He had accumulated his cold-killing intent for more than 10 days before shooting that talisman arrow. But now he wanted the Tao addict to admit that it was an accident. It was really shameless. To Ning Kai's surprise, Yi Hongyu did not mock him. Instead, she became silent and said slowly after a long time, if you are worried that the great divine priest will be angry at you because Long Qing was disabled, then I can promise to solve this problem for you. Let me tell you something. I just realized that I made a big mistake in everything I wrote after my book friend reminded me. That is, I wrote Fu as Liao. This. I can say that other mistakes are clerical errors, and most of them are indeed clerical errors. I really can't do anything about it. It is just that I have not learned the basic knowledge of Chinese well. I have changed all of them in the manuscript. I really can't do VIP. Please forgive me and try not to make mistakes in the future. Thank you for your monthly votes. There is still one chapter left today. The time is not fixed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 301. Prince Long Qing was the most promising figure in the younger generation of Haotian Taoism. He was the priest of the judicial department and the brilliant and beautiful son of God who attracted women and fools to Haotian Taoism. However, his body and spirit were destroyed by an arrow in the Tianqi Mountains. Ning Kei's arrow had caused the West Hill Divine Palace to lose a future great divine priest of judgment or even an even more important figure in future. How could the Divine Hall not be furious? How could the great divine priest of judgment let go of Ning Kei? Even if the West Hill Divine Palace would not kill him directly for the sake of the headmaster of the academy and the headmaster of the academy, they would definitely make him pay a heavy price. Ning Kei shuddered every time he thought of the great divine priest of judgment, who was such a terrifying bigwig, thinking of getting rid of him day and night. That was why he said those words to Yi Hongyu. His original intention was to test how angry the Divine Hall would be. He did not expect that Yi Hongyu would directly promise that the great divine priest of judgment would not make trouble for him. This answer made him a little confused. If there had always been some hidden competition between the Tao addict and Prince Long Qing, it would make sense that she did not care about Long Qing being deposed. But why did she promise that the great divine priest of judgment would not be angry because of this? Why? He stared at Yi Hongyu in confusion. Yi Hongyu did not answer his question. She looked down at the horrible bloody hole in her shoulder and looked annoyed. She asked, "How long do you need to heal me?" Ning Kei rummaged through his luggage for a suitable tool. He lowered his head and said, "It won't take long if it's to stop the bleeding and remove the rot. The key is that the old monk bit too hard. Also, that guy probably hasn't brushed his teeth in decades. He's very dirty. Who knows what kind of poison is in his saliva? Maybe I'll have to cut some meat off later." No one knew when Mo Shanshan had walked to their side. She looked at Yi Hongyu's wounds and frowned in sympathy. She felt disgusted by Ning Kei's words. Yi Hongyu did not react. She said calmly, "He has no teeth. I was bitten by him, so I can be sure." Ning Kei lowered his head and said, "Dirty and smelly saliva is also troublesome." Mo Shanshan could not help but interrupt weakly, "Don't you two think it's disgusting to talk like that?" Ning Kei and Yi Hongyu raised their heads at the same time and looked at her as if they were looking at a pure and innocent rabbit. Then, they shook their heads at the same time. They both felt that girls like Mo Shanshan who had never experienced truly disgusting things were so blessed that it was infuriating. Yi Hongyu continued to discuss with Ning Kei, "Taoism is based on the power of light. You don't have to worry about the poison hiding in your muscles and bones and causing trouble in the future." Ning Kei took out the needle and thread, looked at her and said seriously, "Suturing the wound is the fastest. The problem is that the old monk has bitten off too much of your flesh. If you use this kind of sealing treatment, there may be 2 pits on your shoulders and arms in the future." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said impatiently, "So what if I did?" Ning Kei shook his head and said while threading, "It doesn't look good to leave a hole. I thought you would care about this." Yi Hongyu said scornfully, "Only those mortals care about this." Ning Kei looked down at the bloody hole on her shoulder and thought about where to start. He said casually, "You have such a good figure and like to wear cool red dresses. It always looks weird that there are 2 pits on your naked body. Even if you don't care about it, you have to think about the Divine Hall. You, the Tao addict, are the spokesperson of the Divine Hall. It's good to be beautiful. From now on, I will wear a Taoist robe," Yi Hongyu said. Then, after a moment of silence, she suddenly lifted a piece of flesh on the edge of the bloody hole on her shoulder and pressed it back. She asked in a low voice, "Will the pit be smaller if I sew it like this?" Who in the world would not love a beautiful girl? Even if she was the Tao addict. Ning Ke did not notice the hidden meaning in her tone and naturally did not take this opportunity to mock her. His eyes were all attracted by her fingers and movements. His fingers that were holding the needle trembled slightly. There were not many people in this world who could be so calm after being bitten by a ghost-like old monk. She could even turn the hanging flesh back as if it was not her own body. Ning Ke knew that she must have been in pain, but he did not see a trace of pain on her face. So he was shocked and even regretful. He had not met someone as ruthless as himself for a long time. Should he not care about anything else and kill her first when he met such a person? So it. Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly, "Don't go soft." Ning Ke could not help but sigh. He thought to himself that if he did not go soft, she would have been stabbed to death. The thin needle pierced through the white and tender skin, passing through the scattered flesh, and then came back again, carrying the thread through the girl's delicate shoulder and sewing. Yi Hongyu watched quietly and did not cry out in pain, but her beautiful face became paler and paler. Mo Shanshan squatted on the other side of Yi Hongyu and tightly pursed her thin lips. She frowned as she watched Ning Ke raise and drop the needle in his hand. She subconsciously held Yi Hongyu's hand tightly and wanted to pass her strength to her so that she could hold on. In the dark room of the Devil's Hall, the three most outstanding young people in the cultivation world had paid a terrible price to overthrow the most outstanding powerhouse of the previous generation. They squatted in the corner like three injured mice, healing each other, protecting each other and giving each other strength. It was as if they had long forgotten that they had fought each other in the fields. It was finally over. The two terrifying holes on Yi Hongyu's body were no longer bleeding. The filthy flesh had also been removed. Her face was abnormally pale, but her eyes were unusually bright. She had no intention of fainting to escape the pain. Ning Ke kept the needle and thread and happened to meet her bright eyes when he raised his head. He could not help but feel moved. He was very curious about how she had managed to forcefully rise up and successfully turn the situation around when she had been completely subdued by the old monk. At that time, he had been in that mysterious state and only knew the result but not the process. Yi Hongyu knew what he wanted to ask when she saw his gaze. In fact, she was also very confused. What had Ning Ke realized in that state? The sword marks on the stone wall were left by Mr. Ke. Could it be that this guy had been lucky enough to inherit Mr. Ke's Haran sword? Both of them were confused and curious, but neither of them asked. That was because they were not sure if they could get the real answer from each other. They were even more unwilling to tell each other their own answers. Mo Shanshan and Yi Hongyu leaned against the stone wall to rest. It would still take a long time for them to completely recover from their injuries and physical weakness. Ning Ke's injuries were the lightest and he did not have much mental problems. He walked towards the field. The mountain of corpses had long been turned into ruins by the impact of the aura. He walked in with difficulty and looked at the pile of ashes that the old monk had turned into. He shook his head in silence. He did not know how to evaluate Lotus 32 Petals, a peerless powerhouse who possessed both Taoism and devil's powers. Thinking back to the time when this person could stand shoulder to shoulder with youngest uncle, he was one of the few people who stood in the world. Who knew how much light was waiting for him in front of him. However, this person's choice was so crazy and even unreasonable. Standing beside the pile of ashes, Ning Ke raised his eyes and looked around. He looked at the mottled sword marks on the stone wall and thought about how he had inherited youngest uncle's mantle. A sense of grandeur rose in his chest and abdomen. He wanted to expel the inexplicable feelings that he had after joining the devil and the death of Lotus had brought to him. At this moment, the inexplicable sadness that he had felt when he had just woken up surged into his body again. He subconsciously looked at a stone wall and for some reason, he felt a pang of sorrow. He did not know that the wall faced the south. After a while, he shook his head to get rid of this inexplicable emotion. When he turned back to look at the pile of ashes on the ground, he had some other feelings, especially when he recalled the feelings and the incomprehensible fragmented information that the old monk had sent to him in the spiritual world before his death. He increasingly felt that the ashes on the ground were filled with a sense of pity. It has nothing to do with the grudges of the predecessors. No matter what, we were acquaintances, even though it was not a pleasant acquaintance. After all, you are a senior who once commanded the wind and rain in the world. You have to have a place to stay after your death. Ning Kai searched among the broken bones around him and found an inconspicuous iron box. It was probably a relic of a powerhouse from the Devil's Doctrine. He opened the box and found that it was empty inside. This is quite suitable. Even though it is a little small, it can only contain a part of you. He squatted beside the pile of ashes that Master Lotus had turned into and spread his hands. Then, he casually picked up a large piece of white leg bone and swept the ashes into the iron box. His actions were very casual, as if he was sweeping away rubbish. He had come to the depths of the wilderness under the orders of his sect and waited for the right time for the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine to open. He wanted to enter to search for the tomes of arcane. However, who would have thought that he would not die after crossing swords and arrows, nor would he be able to stop the stone array tactics. Instead, he had met an old monster in the Devil's Doctrine that everyone thought had died decades ago. He had heard countless shocking stories of the past and struggled in agony between life and death countless times. In the end, he had survived miserably. As the most outstanding figure of the younger generation in the cultivation world, his mind was naturally unusually firm. However, after experiencing so many things, the three of them naturally had less desire to fight for the tomes of arcane. Ning Kai had inherited the mantle of youngest uncle. He was very satisfied to be able to bring the aura that had been away from home for a long time back to the academy. Yi Hongyu had been seriously injured both physically and mentally. She needed to find a place to rest and recuperate. She, who had come to the wilderness under the orders of her master to seek defeat, had finally been completely defeated. Moreover, she had found the only chance to win through her own willpower and determination. She was also very satisfied to be able to obtain such rare and precious experience and feelings. Mo Shanshan had cracked the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and understood the array intent of the Great Blockage Formation. She had gained a lot. More importantly, she had finally bravely said those words to Ning Kai before the shadow of death. Even though both she and Ning Kai had forgotten about that moment, in fact, she was the one who was the most satisfied among the three. The following is a separate chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 302. Ning Kai lowered his head and tidied up the luggage scattered on the ground. He asked, "Can you walk?" Mo Shanshan's face was thinner than usual, which made her look more delicate. She smiled bitterly. Yi Hongyu leaned against the wall tiredly and frowned. It was obvious that she could not walk. The main reason was that they were seriously injured, but there was another important reason why they were struggling to walk: hunger. Their empty stomachs couldn't even make a sound at this point. Ning Kai sighed and said, "Why are we so hungry? How many days have we been unconscious?" Mo Shanshan shook her head and said, "I don't know." Ning Kai's palm landed on his abdomen and pressed down gently. He paused for a moment and said, 4 days. Mo Shanshan squinted her eyes to see him more clearly. She asked in confusion, "You know that already?" Yi Hongyu, who had been silent all this while, suddenly interrupted and asked, "Are you always hungry?" Ning Kai was unpacking his luggage again. When he heard her question, he replied casually, "I may not be as good as you and many others in terms of state, but no one in this world has more experience of enduring hunger than me." Yi Hongyu said scornfully, "I don't know where your disgusting self-confidence comes from. You actually dare to talk about starvation. That is because you have not experienced a childhood like mine." Ning Ke was furious to be questioned by a Hautian Taoism girl who had grown up in luxury. He scolded her, "How would a woman like you know what it was like during the drought?" Yi Hongyu smiled mockingly and was about to say something. Mo Shanshan sighed and looked at the two of them helplessly. She said, "Is this worth fighting over?" Ning Ke did not continue reminiscing about his childhood. He used facts to prove that his memory and fear of hunger were stronger than Yi Hongyu's, because he had successfully found some food from his luggage. There was always a small mountain of luggage beside him. When the big black horse was present, the big black horse would carry it on his back. When the big black horse was not present, he would carry it on his back. No matter how dangerous the Tianxi Mountains were, no matter what kind of danger they faced, he would never abandon his luggage. That was because he was very clear about the importance of stocking up. There were medicines, weapons, and sleeping bags that he had researched himself in the luggage. Of course, there would be food. Yi Hongyu leaned against the wall and watched the guy take things out of his luggage as if he was moving. There was a strange look in her eyes. When she saw the slender black arrow case, the strange look in her eyes became more intense. It was the arrow in the box that had crippled Long Qing. These terrifyingly powerful arrows had caused her great suffering outside the mountain gate. She did not know which sect in the world could actually cultivate arrows, nor could she remember when such a powerful arrow had appeared. She had been obsessed with Taoism all her life, so she was shocked and confused. She wanted to ask Ning Ke about it, but she knew that it must be his trump card to save his life, so she could not ask. Ning Ke passed a piece of jerky in a small water bag to her and said, "The meat of the desolate man is better than the jerky in the army. Eat it with water, but don't eat too much. Chew slowly." After saying this, he walked to Mo Shanshan and sat down beside her. He tore the jerky into shreds and passed it to her. Mo Shanshan smiled and shook her head. She tried to raise her weak arms to eat by herself. Ning Ke shook his head and insisted on feeding her the shredded meat. Then, he raised the water bag and fed her a few mouthfuls of water. Yi Hongyu did not notice the movement beside her. She was staring at the hard jerky in her hands in a daze. She had experienced many hardships and seen many tragic things in her life. Logically speaking, there should not be any problems that she could not overcome. However, looking at the jerky and feeling the feeling in her fingers, she thought of the dried corpse in the White Bone Mountain. She thought of the Divine Lord Lotus's corpse-like fingers and cold, dry lips. She frowned slightly and stared at the jerky in front of her as if she was staring at a heavenly book. After some time, she took a deep breath and put the jerky into her mouth. Then, she chewed mechanically. After eating, drinking, and resting for a while, the three of them recovered some energy and prepared to leave. At this moment, a new problem appeared. They did not know if it was because the confinement array had been broken or for some other reason, but the tunnel that they used to enter the Devil's Hall had completely collapsed. With their current physical strength, they could not force their way through. Ning Ke looked at the stone mountain that blocked the tunnel. After thinking for a while, he turned around and walked towards the stone wall opposite him. There were two iron chains deeply embedded in the stone wall. In the past decades, these two iron chains had locked Master Lotus here, causing him to suffer a rare pain and torture. However, now that the confinement had been broken and Lotus was dead, the iron chains only had some rust on them. The aura of the talisman had long dissipated and they had become the most ordinary iron chains. Ning Ke held the iron chains with both hands and took a deep breath. He secretly released the aura deep in his abdomen and used all his strength to pull. With a loud bang, the stone wall collapsed and revealed a deep tunnel behind it. Yi Hongyu and Mo Shanshan supported each other and walked behind him. Yi Hongyu looked at the deep tunnel that seemed to have no end. She frowned slightly and asked, "How did you know that there was a tunnel behind that wall?" "I guessed," Ning Ke answered matter-of-factly. In fact, it was a vague feeling in his mind that he could discover that there was a tunnel behind the iron chains and the stone wall. He did not know where this feeling came from. He silently thought that it could be the effect of the information that Master Lotus had sent to his sense of perception before he died. The Devil's Doctrine is a place where one can only enter but not leave. To be more precise, after the Devil's Doctrine was destroyed, a kind of inhibition appeared and only left one exit. I believe that there are countless of such tunnels that will eventually lead to the same place. The feeling in his mind appeared again and Ning Ke subconsciously said this. Then, he was slightly shocked and fell into a long silence as he looked at the tunnel in front of him. At this moment, he finally understood that regardless of whether he could understand the information that Lotus had sent to him, it would appear and tell him what he should do when needed. A piercing chill took over Ning Ke's body. He looked at the deep tunnel in a daze and did not know what to say. What kind of state would be able to leave behind such a method? What exactly were those incomprehensible information fragments? Was it Lotus' impression of the world or the cultivation method of the Devil's Doctrine? What would these bring to him? Yi Hongyu looked at his back and was a little shocked at his knowledge. No one in the Divine Hall should know that the Devil's Doctrine had such a strange setup, but he did. However, she naturally thought that it was the knowledgeable and omniscient headmaster who had told Ning Ke these secrets of the Devil's Doctrine. She completely did not connect it to the dead Divine Lord Lotus. The four sides of the tunnel were made of stones and looked extremely sturdy. It was deep and very dark. Under the circumstances where there was no light source, it was very difficult for the three of them to walk, even with their eyesight. Along the way, they passed by a few forks. The three of them tried to pick a random one and realized that their luck had finally improved. They actually did not go the wrong way. Standing in front of the cliff outside the tunnel, Ning Ke smiled bitterly as he looked at the bottomless fog beneath his feet. He thought to himself that this was not luck at all. It was obvious that there was an old ghost who loved to eat humans in the dark that was giving him directions. The fog was very deep and they did not know what was below them. Judging from the distance that they had walked in the tunnel, the three of them should still be in the Tianqi Mountains. Ning Ke tied the heavy luggage on his body tighter and pointed to a tripwire that seemed to be in disrepair at the edge of the cliff. He said, "If you are not afraid, then we should go up." After the long tunnel, there was a long noose. The basket that was hung under the long rope was not big, but it was more than enough to fit the three of them. Listening to the sound of the wind whistling past the basket and seeing the fog that was within reach, the three of them gradually relaxed their vigilance. There was a faint light in front of the fog. Ning Ke opened his mouth slightly and vaguely guessed that he had finally left the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He could not help but smile happily. Mo Shanshan sat quietly beside him and looked at him and smiled. Yi Hongyu used her fingers to gently comb her hair that was messed up by the mountain wind. She looked at the unfocused but focused look in Mo Shanshan's eyes and looked at Ning Ke, who was too happy to notice her. She could not help but laugh coldly. Adulterer. Although her voice was very soft, it was extremely clear in this quiet world where there was no one else except for the fog. Ning Ke suddenly became extremely embarrassed and angry. He did not care that they were running for their lives together and wanted to fight with her with all his might. Mo Shanshan was slightly embarrassed but not angry. She looked at Yi Hongyu and explained very seriously, "I like him, but I know that he doesn't like me enough. So I can't say that we are adulterer for now." Yi Hongyu was slightly stunned. She did not expect that a woman like the calligraphy addict would become a fierce woman once she fell in love. She could not help but sigh regretfully but could not say anything. As for Ning Kai, apart from squinting his eyes against the cold mountain wind and trying to catch the shapeless clouds outside the basket to pretend that he was still a naive child who could not understand what they were talking about, what else could he do at this moment? No one knew what the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine had used to set up such a long ropeway in the inaccessible Tianqi Mountains. When the basket slowly touched the ground, it was already a long time later. Ning Kai jumped out of the basket and looked back. The two girls stood beside him and looked back at the same time. The fog in the mountain gradually dissipated and he could clearly see the end of a very thin black line. It was a lonely and proud snow-capped peak. They had come down from that snow-capped peak. It was believed that they would never want to return to that snow-capped peak. Ning Kai looked at the unworldly snow-capped peak where the Devil's Doctrine was and could not help but shake his head. He reached into the basket and wanted to take out his luggage. However, he did not expect to touch a soft and smooth little ball of meat. He looked at the little white dog in his hands in shock and wondered where this little thing came from. He had been frightened enough these few days. Please don't be some elder of the Devil's Doctrine. Please don't be the ghost of Master Lotus. I really wanted to write an entire chapter about the scene on the ropeway, to watch the scenery and talk about the past. This is what one should do in their youth. This is the time worth remembering before people fight in the future, just like Yen Sei and Guangming. However, people said that it was too long, so I could only hold back my tears and not write it. I have something to do in the afternoon. The next chapter will probably be at night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 303. The little white dog was very obedient and adorable. It looked at Ning Kai innocently with its watery eyes. Ning Kai stared at it blankly as countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Suddenly, the little white dog's watery eyes revealed a hint of pride. It opened its mouth abruptly and revealed its short but sharp teeth. It bit at Ning Kai's wrist with such force that it seemed like it was going to bite off his hand. The innocent and adorable little white dog had turned into a ferocious and terrifying wolf cub in the next moment. It bit at Ning Kai's wrist at an extremely fast speed, especially when it closed its teeth. It was so fast that it could not be seen with the naked eye. It was almost as fast as lightning. If Ning Kai was bitten, his flesh and bones would definitely be broken. This sudden attack was insidious and sudden. If it was an ordinary person, they would not be able to escape the lightning-fast bite. However, Ning Kai had been dealing with dangerous prey all his life. He was the most sensitive to the movements of these beasts and the most alert to the dangers in the forest. How could he fall for this trick? When his fingertips touched the dog's neck, he felt a slight buildup of strength. He reacted and shoved his right hand into the little white dog's mouth. Then, he mercilessly went in, as if he wanted to shove his entire arm into the little white dog's stomach. Then, his fingers found a soft piece of meat in the sticky mess and pinched hard. The little white dog let out a stifled howl. Everything from its mouth to its throat was stuffed, leaving no space for it to move. How could it still bite down? The intense pain in the depths of its throat caused its round body to tremble violently. Saliva dripped from the corners of its mouth, making it look extremely pitiful. Ning Kai raised his left hand in the air and shook his head at the drooling little white dog whose eyes were already red from fighting. He had hunted countless beasts in Min Mountain and encountered countless dangers. However, he was forced to use such a risky move when his prey was so close to his mouth. He had only used it once when he met the wolf pack when he was young. Mo Shanshan and Yi Hongyu looked away from the snow-capped peak and were shocked by the scene. Ning Kai raised his arm high with a little white dog dangling from the tip of his arm. Half of his arm was completely submerged in the little white dog's mouth. It looked like he was holding a white torch, or an iron rod piercing through his prey and preparing to roast it. The prey was still alive and drooling, so the scene was a little ridiculous. Where did the dog come from? Mo Shanshan asked with a slight frown. I don't know either. Ning Kai looked up at the little white dog in front of his arm. The wet and sticky feeling on his arm did not move him at all. He looked at the pitiful and struggling expression in its eyes and could not help but be slightly moved. He felt that this little thing seemed to be able to understand human nature, just like the big black horse or the big white goose second brother raised. Yi Hongyu looked at the snow-white puppy warily but did not say anything. Ning Kai looked at the snow-white fur of the little white dog and thought of something. He sighed and said, I have always wanted to raise a beautiful Samoyed, but never had the chance. I didn't expect to meet you. Mo Shanshan did not understand what a Samoyed was, but she could not help but sympathize with Ning Kai for being too cruel when she saw the little white dog kicking its hind legs in pain and drooling. She said, then raise it. Yi Hongyu laughed coldly and pinched a Taoist formula behind her back. She looked indifferently at the back of the mountain path. Ning Kai used his empty left hand to rub the head of the little white dog and found that he felt a familiar and intimate aura from it. He could not help but frown. He thought to himself that youngest uncle's legacy was in the front gate of the devil's doctrine, so he felt close and familiar. But what was with this dog? Could it be youngest uncle's pet? There was a human arm in its mouth, and its stomach could even taste human flesh, but it couldn't bite it down. It couldn't even lick it to satisfy its craving. The little white dog was in extreme pain, and the soft piece of flesh that was pinched deep in its throat made it feel an extreme sense of fear and obedience. The little white dog looked at Ning Kai with its watery eyes, showing signs of begging and submission. It did not mind submitting to this human's aura. As for the reason why its eyes were so watery, it was because it was in too much pain. Don't look at me like that, it will make me struggle. Ning Kai looked at the little white dog and sighed. Although I really want to raise a Samoyed, and you have also expressed your willingness to be adopted by me, I can only say that Haotian's fated chance is too cruel. I am too hungry now, and in my eyes, you are more like a pot of fragrant dog meat. He used his left hand to pull out the padao from the scabbard and held it in his mouth, preparing to kill the dog and disembowel it. He continued to comfort it with a muffled voice, eating is more important than Haotian. If someone like Master Lotus wants to live, he has to eat human flesh every day, so what if we eat a few pieces of dog meat? He suddenly remembered that this seemingly cute little thing was the easiest to deceive young girls. He had forgotten to ask for the two girls' opinions. He took down the padao with one hand and held the dog with the other, saying, we need live food. Mo Shanshan could not bear to watch and turned around. Yi Hongyu's eyes flashed with excitement and asked, do you do this often? Ning Kai waved the padao and said proudly, don't talk about killing dogs, I got tired of eating wolves in Min Mountain. When the little white dog that was suspended in his hand heard this, it realized that this fellow was actually a bloodthirsty pervert who dared to eat wolf meat. It was instantly scared out of its wits and lost its last hope. Its soft body stiffened like a block of wood. Ning Kai did not care whether the little white dog was as gentle as a cat or as stiff as a rock. He had eaten everything in his life, and he did not believe in the idiotic theory that prey would secrete poison to make the meat unpalatable due to fear before it died. He picked up the padao and started to skim the little white dog's head. After all, Sang Sang did not like him killing cubs after he killed the old hunter, so he needed to familiarize himself with the physiological structure of the other party. At this moment, an extremely angry roar suddenly sounded from the rope that was hidden behind the thin fog. Because of the long distance and the rapid approach of the voice, the clear and angry voice was compressed into an even sharper voice. Who dare move me? When the clear and angry voice sounded, it was obvious that the person was still far away in the depths of the valley. When the word "move" was said, the person was already in the clouds diagonally above them. When the word "of" was said, the person was already very close to the three people on the ground. The clouds were disturbed and a large area was broken in an instant. Then, like a stone falling from the sky, a figure jumped down from the rope diagonally above and jumped towards Ning Kei's position. Ning Kei carried the little white dog and looked back into the fog. He looked at the graceful figure that was so fast that it did not seem like a mortal. He was stunned and thought, could a fairy really fall from the sky? However, when the old leather boot expanded rapidly in his field of vision and approached his face with the terrifying sound of the wind, he finally understood that it was not a fairy that fell from the sky, but someone who wanted to kill him. There was a whistling sound of a sword. Yi Hongyu had been on guard against the appearance of the person and had secretly accumulated her psyche power for a long time. Just as the figure was about to hit Ning Kei, she released the Taoist formula and an invisible sword style pierced towards the figure. The person who jumped down from the fog snorted and made a cross with his fists in front of him. He had actually used his own body to forcefully block Yi Hongyu's sword that she had been preparing for a long time. His body suddenly somersaulted a dozen times and then landed heavily on the ground. With a muffled hum, the valley was filled with dust and dust. The dust gradually settled and the figure of the person was revealed. It was a little girl wearing a fur coat. She wore an animal skin hat on her head and a beast's tail was wrapped around her collar. Judging from her figure and the exposed eyes, she was definitely still very young. Ning Kei had heard that the other party was the demoness from the Devil's Doctrine. However, he did not think that there was anything demonic about her except for her demonic abilities. Looking at the little girl's blushing face, innocent eyes and long black braids, he suddenly felt that he had heard someone describe such a girl before. However, he could not remember where. The situation on the monthly votes list is a little tense. If you have extra monthly votes in your account, please support us. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 304. This title doesn't mean that I'm not a serious person. I never do serious things. It's just that the things I'm going to talk about today are more serious. First of all, the simplified version of Shoegaze had been officially published. Moreover, it had started to be widely distributed. Of course, those who had read it would know that it was a very good novel. If everyone wanted to read it on paper, they might as well buy the original version. Those who haven't read it should subscribe to the electronic version first. Then buy the original version and read it in bed. I'm a serious person who never lies. It's really good. The Xinhua bookstores should be putting it on the shelves now. Dangdang Zhuiyue and Taobao have also officially started selling it. When I have some time in a few days, I'll sort it out. I'll post it in the book review section or a single chapter. It's actually very easy to search for it. I know that many readers have already gotten the first episode of Rising Tide. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude and remind everyone to make sure that it's published by Wuhan Publishing House. Don't buy pirated copies. Also, don't forget to give it 5 stars and give it a good review. Don't worry, Taiwanese friends. Rising Tide will be released soon. I'll show off then. Then, about the time. Tomorrow is Saturday. I'll keep my good tradition and take a vacation. Don't sigh and laugh at me. I'm not the kind of person who has to show off. I'll take a day off tomorrow. In fact, I'll have to write at night. I'll return to Hubei the day after tomorrow, which is the 6th. I won't be able to write if I'm delayed on the road. I'll be very busy these days to ensure that there will be more updates on the 7th. I'll do my best to write. If I can't, I'll let everyone know. I'm most worried about the cat and dog. I'll entrust the dog to my friend, Dr. Jiang. I'll also entrust him to feed the cat at home every 2 days. It seems that Little Black's weight loss plan is within reach. I'll thank him here. My leader can only stay in Hubei for 3 days. It's very tiring. I'm sure she'll be exhausted. Her plan, for my annual party and work, she'll have to put in a lot of effort. I'll thank her here. Let me thank you very seriously. In the past, I loved and wanted to avoid the monthly votes list. One of the reasons was that this matter could easily cause gossip and unhappiness. However, my dears have voted so many monthly votes. You are as nervous as I am, but you are so gentle and lovely that you do not criticize other books and authors. It wasn't easy to keep my emotions in a state of excitement and moderation. Of course, I also have to thank the other book friends. No matter if it's the fatty ear root, the Shota tomato, or the Uncle Moon Gate, they're all so gentle and considerate to me. I blew a kiss. Thank you, everyone. I hope that no matter what happens to the votes, we can still be happy. Let us go on living decently, not decently. Let us all go on writing seriously, and reading irregularly. Finally, let me say something serious. I'm trying to get monthly votes. If you still have monthly votes, please vote for Nightfall. Right now, both I and this book need your support. The fat but not lazy serious cat waved his paw and saluted. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 305. Tang Xiaotang looked at the 3 people in front of her and scratched her head in distress. She felt very troublesome. She followed her brother outside the front gate and watched the 3 people enter the Holy Land. Then she lost track of them. She did not expect to meet them in the valley, and it was obvious that the 3 were no longer enemies. Although she was confident that she was not weaker than them, she did not think that she was strong enough to fight against the Tao addict, the calligraphy addict and the core disciples of the headmaster. When they left the Holy Land and passed through the long and complicated passageways, Little White, who had been following her, suddenly went missing. She searched for it for a long time and finally jumped down with the hope of being lucky. Unexpectedly, she heard someone talking about how to kill Little White and eat it. Her joy was immediately replaced by anger. She was hot-headed and jumped down without caring that she was high up in the sky. Then she was attacked by Yi Hongyu's Taoist sword. For reasons unknown to her, Yi Hongyu had inexplicably fallen from the knowing destiny state to the see-through state. That attack did not really hurt her, but her body, which had inherited the bloodline of the desolate, was very strong. After all, she was not a stone. She still suffered internal injuries from jumping from such a high place, but it could not be seen on the surface. Tang Xiaotang shuddered. Only now did she understand the danger she had been in earlier. She had almost fallen to her death. She thought that if her brother knew that she was so muddle-headed, he would be very angry. She subconsciously pulled down the animal hat on her head and stuck out her tongue in fear. Her little face looked even more adorable. It seems that you have encountered a lot in the Holy Land. The Holy Land is our holy land. It is not a place where you outsiders can enter. I won't bully you because you are injured. Don't bully me because I am outnumbered. Tang Xiaotang thought that her hasty decision was very smart. Anyway, she was going to Chang and to be the disciple of the headmaster of the academy. She could not kill Ning Quebec. She said with a childish voice, "The road is facing the sky. Let's go our separate ways." Ning Ke stood behind Yi Hongyu and said before she could speak, "Heroine is right. Let's say goodbye. He was very clear about the real situation of the three of them. They had been tortured by the old monk who ate human flesh for such a long time. No matter if they were the calligraphy addict or the Tao addict, they were now very weak. How could they fight with a girl from the Devil's Doctrine who was full of vitality? Only an idiot would make such a choice. The girl from the Devil's Doctrine looked very cute, but Ning Ke wanted to stay as far away from her as possible. On one hand, it was because of the threat brought by her powerful strength. More importantly, it was because of the stories that Master Lotus told and what he had done. It made him feel an inexplicable fear towards the Devil's Doctrine. Even if he had joined the Devil, it did not mean that he would naturally be close to the people from the Devil's Doctrine. It was just like how youngest uncle joined the Devil's Doctrine in the past, but he still destroyed the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Seeing that Tang Xiaotang was about to speak, Ning Ke gradually relaxed, but his body was still tense. He subconsciously clenched his right hand behind his back, but he forgot that his right hand was stuffed into the little white dog's throat. His fingers tightened, and the little white dog suddenly felt as if it had been struck by lightning, struggling and letting out a weak whine. Tang Xiaotang, who was about to leave, was startled when she heard the weak and miserable cry of a dying person calling for their loved ones. Then, she came back to her senses and hit her head in annoyance. She thought that she must have fallen too hard just now and was confused. She almost forgot why she took the risk to jump down. She looked at the three of them and said while suppressing her anger, "Return little white to me, and I will leave." Yi Hongyu looked back at Ning Ke expressionlessly and then walked to the side. Ning Ke glared at her and raised his right hand. He looked at Tang Xiaotang and said, "Is this your dog? No wonder it's so cute. I was wondering how there could be such a dog in such a remote valley. So it's the sacred dog of the Devil's Doctrine." The little white dog looked miserable when it was raised into the air. Its mouth was wide open, and saliva mixed with blood dripped from it. Its abdomen rose and fell slightly, and it looked at its owner pitifully and helplessly. Its eyes had turned red from the struggle. Tang Xiaotang looked at it. How could she still listen to Ning Ke's flattery? Her clear eyes were filled with endless anger, and then gradually turned red. A strong wind blew, and a heavy sound of impact was heard. Smoke and dust gradually fell. Tang Xiaotang glared at Ning Ke, who was leaning against the smooth stone surface of the valley, and shouted angrily, "I'm going to kill you." Ning Ke's arm was in so much pain that he could not lift it. He did not know how many pieces of his bones had been smashed by the little girl's fist. At this moment, he finally believed Yi Hongyu's words. This siren from the Devil's Doctrine was indeed terrifying. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. He looked at Tang Xiaotang and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I gave in to you, so we're even. If you still want to fight, don't blame me for being rude. Is the Enlightenment Doctrine that great? I'm the successor of the headmaster of the academy." It was obvious that the title of the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy was not as useful to the angry girl from the Devil's Doctrine as it was to the people from the Divine Hall or the Buddhism sect. Tang Xiaotang did not react at all. Mo Shanshan stood beside Ning Ke and quietly looked at the little girl who was gradually approaching. Yi Hongyu glanced at Ning Ke with a smile and then stood further away. Ning Ke looked at Mo Shanshan and shook his head. He said, "You're already in this state. Save your strength." Mo Shanshan said softly, "Am I supposed to watch you be beaten to death because of a dog? How can a person like me be beaten to death by a little girl? This kind of death has never been in my consideration." Ning Ke stood up with the support of the stone wall. He held the tragic little white dog tightly in his hand and looked at Tang Xiaotang seriously. He said, "If you dare to take another step forward, I'll strangle this broken dog of yours to death." Tang Xiaotang's expression changed slightly. She stopped and said angrily, "How can you be so shameless?" Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, "In my opinion, you're even more shameless to bully me when I'm injured. And you're really no match for us. The Tao addict is here. Since you couldn't beat her before, do you think you can beat her now? You don't have to rush to refute. Think about it carefully. Yes, she has indeed fallen from the knowing destiny state to the see-through state. But she was also in the see-through state when you lost to her." Tang Xiaotang frowned slightly. She felt that Ning Ke's words seemed to make sense, but it also seemed to make no sense at all. Ning Ke looked at her expression and added, "After all, she had stayed in the knowing destiny state for a period of time and had the experience of a grand cultivator. Experience is very important in a battle. I guess you don't have this kind of experience." Tang Xiaotang shook her head and answered honestly, "Our enlightenment doctrine is not divided into 5 states like Haotian Taoism. But my current state of strength has not reached the knowing destiny state that you speak of. The devil's doctrine did not have 5 states." Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He thought that his life in the future would be very bad and it would be easy for others to find out that he had joined the devil. He frowned and decided to deal with the problem in front of him first. "No matter what, you can't beat the Tao addict. You can't beat the 3 of us even if we fight together." Mo Shanshan smiled beside him and said, "I really can't beat her." Yi Hongyu said coldly from afar, "I can fight if I really want to, but why should I?" Ning Ke was very annoyed. He thought that there was no need to be so honest at this time. But looking at Mo Shanshan and Yi Hongyu's attitude, he knew that there should not be any real danger. So he looked at the girl from the devil's doctrine and said sincerely, "The most important thing is to be happy. I can understand your anger, but I hope that you can understand my injustice." He continued, "Although your dog was a little frightened, I can guarantee that it did not lose a piece of meat. I will put it down and return it to you now. I hope that you will not be hot-headed again, okay?" Tang Xiaotang looked at the little thing in his hand and could not care so much anymore. She nodded hurriedly. Ning Ke pulled his hand out of the little white dog's mouth and handed it over. Tang Xiaotang hugged Little White happily and kept stroking its white fur to comfort it. Little White rubbed against her cheeks weakly and then buried its head in the little girl's soft arms that had just started to develop. Ning Ke took a few steps back and praised, "What a cute little dog." Tang Xiaotang explained seriously, "Little White is a snow wolf, not a little dog." Ning Ke suddenly understood and said, "So it is a little white wolf." At this moment, the little white wolf in the arms of the girl from the devil's doctrine secretly looked up at him. Its eyes were extremely vicious, as if it was saying that it would bite Ning Ke to death if there was a chance in the future. It is indeed a wolf cub. Ning Ke thought hatefully in his heart. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely throw this wolf cub into the back of the mountain of the academy and let it have a taste of second brother's big white goose. Before Tang Xiaotang left, she said to the 3 of them, "Even though there is only one path to leave the Holy Land, this valley was excavated by the previous sages of the Enlightenment doctrine. Thus, a few maze formations have been set up. Recently, there has been a lot of fog. When you go out, be careful. If you get lost, you may not be able to walk out." Mo Shanshan calmly bowed and said, "Thank you for your reminder." If it was in the past, the young talisman master would definitely not hesitate to fight with the remaining evil of the devil's doctrine, especially such an important demoness. However, after coming from the great river kingdom in the south to the wilderness in the north and walking with Ning Ke for such a long time, especially after experiencing the matter of Master Lotus, she had a lot of new understanding of the difference between the devil's doctrine and Taoism. Naturally, she would not view things as she did in the past. Tang Xiaotang said, "You are welcome. I just want to make this guy feel bad." That guy was naturally referring to Ning Quebec. He smiled and said, "Why don't we go together? Tang Xiaotang looked at him and said proudly, "You always say that the Enlightenment doctrine is the devil's doctrine and that Taoism and the devil's doctrine are irreconcilable. Why do you want me to take you away now? I want you to beg me." "Why don't you beg me?" Ning Ke said righteously, "What are you talking about?" The Academy has always been tolerant. The difference between Taoism and the devil's doctrine is more of a difference in ideas to the Academy. As for me, I have always admired the demeanor of the predecessors of the Enlightenment doctrine. Then, he became serious and said, "Miss Tang, please take us with you. I beg you." I left home in the wee hours of the morning and spent the whole night writing. I'm on a plane now. If everything goes well, I can reach home in the evening. Today, the 2 chapters will be updated on time. The second chapter will be at 3 in the afternoon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 306. The first sentence completely ignored the 1,000-year history of the bloody war between Taoism and the devil's doctrine, and even ignored the fact that the devil's doctrine was destroyed by Mr. Ku of the Academy. It was already extremely shameless, but it seemed to make some sense. Moreover, Ning Ke looked righteous and could still maintain the demeanor of a disciple of the Academy. However, the next sentence that followed after the awe-inspiring righteousness was so direct and straightforward. He asked for it without any hesitation or concealment. It was really shameless to the extreme. Tang Xiaotang looked at Ning Ke blankly. She did not expect that he would really beg her. She was even a little dazed. Was what her brother said true? Was he really a core disciple of the headmaster of the Academy? Even Mo Shanshan, who already knew Ning Ke's temperament very well, felt a little hot on her face. She stood a little further away from Ning Ke with a trace of shame in her eyes. Yi Hongyu shook her head in disgust. As the only unknown place that connected the human world and the outside world, the Academy was such a proud place. From the headmaster of the Academy to Mr. Ku to Jun Mo, who would really look up to the devil's doctrine? Ning Ke was shameless enough to lie through his teeth. It seemed that the Academy's education without discrimination was not just a legend. Actually, Ning Ke did not need the girl from the devil's doctrine to lead him out of the Tianqi Mountains. With the incomprehensible aura and fragments left behind by Master Lotus, he might be able to follow his intuition and walk out. He had used this method to bring Mo Shanshan and Yi Hongyu out of the devil's doctrine. However, he did not want to try again, because finding the right path in those deep passages could be attributed to luck, but if he was lucky too many times, it would easily arouse suspicion. "Miss Tang, where are you going?" Ning Ke asked. Tang Xiaotang replied, "I'm going south." The south was a very broad concept, especially since they were in the bitterly cold Tianqi Mountains in the extreme north of the continent. No matter where they wanted to go, it seemed that they had to go south first. However, Tang Xiaotang spoke very seriously, and so did Ning Quebec. He even followed her words and spoke his own thoughts. What a coincidence, we're also going south. So we're going the same way. As the saying goes, a chance encounter is better than an invitation. Shall we go together? The passageways leading to the outside of the mountains were stone valleys that were dug out by the masters of the devil's doctrine countless years ago. The stone walls were smooth and steep as if they were cut by a knife. Even an eagle would not be able to stop. No one knew how many years of wind, frost, rain, and snow had passed, but there was still no dust, so it was naturally impossible for there to be lush green grass. The Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace, the young girl of the Devil's Doctrine, the calligraphy addict of Mogan Mountain, and the weakest world wayfarer in the history of the Academy. The four of them walked silently in the narrow and long stone valley. Silence was not the right word. In my opinion, we, the young generation of the cultivation world, cannot repeat the mistakes of our seniors. Mo Shanshan's expression turned solemn as she asked, "What mistakes? Fighting as soon as we meet? What's the point of fighting? When I'm free, I'll hide in the mountains and cultivate. If I see him, I'll just greet him and chat. Isn't that better than anything else?" Yi Hongyu said coldly, "No fighting, no cultivation. I've always opposed this view, but I won't argue with a cultivation addict like you. If I have the chance to go to Chang'an in the future, I'll treat you 3 to noodles." Noodles with fried eggs cooked by Sang Sang. Tang Xiaotang looked at his profile curiously and asked, "Who's Sang Sang?" "Sang Sang is my little handmaiden. You should know that the noodles made by Sang Sang are absolutely the best noodles in the world." Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Kei's haggard face, but when he mentioned a certain name, he would be in high spirits. She smiled slightly and did not say anything. However, she did not know why she felt a little empty in her heart and a little uneasy. Ning Kei looked at Tang Xiaotang and said seriously, "Even if we want to fight, let's not fight now. It'll be more magnificent if we fight outside. Speaking of which, in fact, my hatred for the West Hill Divine Palace is very deep, no less than yours." Speaking of this, he lowered his voice and looked at Yi Hongyu's back in front of him. He said, "Does Prince Long Qing know?" Tang Xiaotang was infected by his expression and her voice came out from the beast's tail. She whispered, "I know. I saw you shoot through him with 1 arrow. Your arrow is really powerful. You can still hit someone from so far away." Ning Kei said sincerely, "It's not as powerful as the Enlightenment Doctrine skills. How dare you jump from such a high place?" Tang Xiaotang lowered her head shyly and said softly, "I was also confused at that time." Ning Kei pointed at Yi Hongyu's back and whispered, "Prince Long Qing was disabled by me. There's no reason for the West Hill Divine Palace not to take revenge on me. In fact, this woman has always wanted to kill me. However, I made an agreement with her in the Holy Land that we would only do it outside. So if we really fight outside the mountain, I can help you." Although he spoke softly, he did not deliberately hide it from anyone. After all, they were walking together in this secluded valley. There was no time for them to make any conspiracy or play the art of coordination. Yi Hongyu, who was walking in front, stopped and looked back at him. She said with slight anger, "Ning Kei, can you shut up? I really feel bad for the headmaster of the academy to accept you as a disciple. I'm sure that you will become the shame of the academy in the future." "There's no need for the future. I'm already the shame of the academy." Ning Kei answered with a smile. He was telling the truth. After the inexplicable fight with the Xie family of the South Jin Kingdom, he was ostracized and ignored by his fellow students in the academy for several months. He did not know how many times they had whispered about the shame of the academy. He had long learned to ignore it. Moreover, he never thought that it was a derogatory term. He was willing to do anything as long as he could keep Sang Sang alive. Since that was the case, it was no big deal for him to say some witty words to please the girl who was the most powerful among the 4 of them, and who did not seem to care about the academy and the headmaster of the academy. She was the girl from the Devil's Doctrine, who did not seem to care about the academy and the headmaster of the academy. As long as he wanted to, he could make all the soldiers and civilians in the city of Wei, Master Yen Sei, and His Majesty happy. Therefore, the girl from the Devil's Doctrine, Tang Xiaotang, was not surprised to be happy and laughed from time to time. "So you are the sister of the legendary Tang. It's an honor to meet you." Ning Kei recalled what Chen Pipi said on the first day in the back of the mountain of the academy. He was slightly shocked and then remembered more things, such as Chen Pipi's description of his dream lover. Therefore, he found that the girl from the Devil's Doctrine beside him looked more and more familiar. Except for her young age, she fit Chen Pippi's description perfectly. Since you're going to the south, you should really go to Chang'an. It has nothing to do with the fried egg noodle I mentioned earlier. It's the most magnificent city in the world and there are many interesting people living there. One of them I want to introduce to you. He's about the same age as me, but he entered the knowing destiny state a few years ago. Everyone says he's a real genius. Tang Xiaotang looked at Ning Ke with her clear eyes and said in surprise, he entered the knowing destiny state at such a young age? Is there really such a person in the world? Is he more powerful than the Tao addict? Hearing this, Yi Hongyu suddenly said, that fatty's temperament is terrible, but his cultivation speed is extremely fast. It can only be said that Haotian is biased towards some people. If we really fight, he's no match for you. After a short pause, she looked at Ning Ke and asked, how is he doing in the academy these years? Ning Ke then remembered that Chen Pippi knew the Tao addict and that every time this person was mentioned, the proud fatty would be scared like a quail. He scratched his head and answered, not bad. Hearing this answer, Yi Hongyu was silent for a long time and then said indifferently, that's good. The four of them walked in the quiet and even a little dead stone valley. They were the most outstanding young people in the cultivation world. They came from different sects, had different ideologies, and even had deep hatred for each other. However, there was no bloody fight or intrigue. Perhaps it was because they had seen too much blood and conspiracy in front of the old monk in the depths of the snow-capped peak, or simply because they did not want to think about it on the way home because their youth was their companion. Youth was really a very beautiful thing. Whether they were obsessed with books, Taoism, power or money, they still retained some simple and pure parts of themselves and did not completely sink into the complicated affairs of the world like a quagmire. If there was only youth left in the world, no old and no decay, perhaps there would be fewer killings and disputes. If they were hot-blooded instead of cold-blooded, they would still fight but directly. Then the world would become much simpler and more beautiful. However, it was a pity that everyone would gradually grow old and become more worldly. There would be many more responsibilities on their shoulders, and those heavy responsibilities would make people bend their backs. It would make people diligent in thinking but too lazy to feel. At the southernmost end of the vast Tianqi mountain, the gradually lower mountain range penetrated into the wilderness and then disappeared into the flat land north of the Hulun Sea. The caravan from the central plains had stayed here for a long time. The lake was almost completely frozen, but they still had no intention of leaving. The middle-aged man slowly raised the edge of his tall hat and looked at the distant snow-capped peak in the sky. He felt that there were people there. Were they from the Taoist temple? Logically speaking, when the Biming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane appeared in the world, Haotian Taoism would not only send the young disciples like the Tao addict and Long Qing, hoping to snatch the tomes of arcane back. However, except for himself and the guy who was hiding somewhere in the world to cultivate 23-year cicada cultivation, who else knew that the only exit after the Holy Land was sealed was in the north of the Hulun Sea? However, even if the Taoist temple sent a world wayfarer, he would not stop his plan. It was because he had been swinging back and forth between the Empire and the West Hill for too many years. He hated this feeling, so he decided to do something. As long as he had the tomes of arcane, he could get real freedom. As one of the few powerful descendants of the devil's doctrine in the world, the middle-aged man firmly believed in this legend. Is it you who likes to carry a wooden sword? The middle-aged man looked at the distant snow-capped peak and smiled contemptuously. He put the remaining half of the lamb leg back on the plate, took a silk handkerchief from his subordinate, and carefully wiped the oil stains between his fingers. Then he stood up. The soles of his shoes stepped on the freshly frozen lake of the Hulun Sea. The middle-aged man slowly walked toward the distant mountains across the lake. Every step he took was so solid that it seemed that he was going to shake the ice. He had many enemies in the world, and those enemies all knew that he did not know how to swim or even feared water. But today, he had to step over the lake, as if he wanted to break through the grievances and dissatisfaction of the past years. The cold wind blew on his chest, and the middle-aged man felt as if he had returned to his youth. This feeling was very good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 307. It was the middle of winter, and the cold wind was blowing in the vast Tianqi mountain. The temperature on the snow-capped peak was extremely low. Fortunately, the peak was too high and was not covered by the mist that permeated the valley between the foothills. The sun shone directly here. Although it did not bring much real warmth, it could bring some psychological comfort. Just as the middle-aged man by the Hulun Sea had guessed, there was indeed someone on the snow-capped peak that had not been seen for tens of thousands of years. It was a Taoist priest in a thin robe with an ebony fork in his hair bun. The Taoist priest looked calm and thin, carrying a wooden sword on his back. He quietly looked at the floating white clouds under the snow-capped peak, the barren wilderness under the white clouds, and the Hulun Sea that was like a white mirror. Yi Su, the world wayfarer from the Zhisho Abbey, had made a bet with Tang, the world wayfarer from the Devil's Doctrine, on the two peaks outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. In the end, Ning Ke won, and Prince Long Qing was disabled. So, he lost. According to the bet that was not spoken but known to both of them, Yi Su could no longer participate in the fight for the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. But this did not mean that he could not stand on the snow-capped peak and watch the show from afar. He saw the middle-aged man by the Hulun Sea, but in fact, he did not look at the middle-aged man. Because if he saw the middle-aged man could also see him. He came from the unworldly unknown place, but he knew very well that there were many real masters hidden in the world, such as the middle-aged man by the Hulun Sea. Even though he was powerful, he still had to be respectful and reserved to the masters at the peak of martial arts in the human world who were close to the divine transcendence. Of course, if he was still the proud lad with a wooden sword more than a decade ago, he would never care about these things. However, he was no longer the young him now. His understanding of the world and himself was already different. It was just that he would occasionally miss the compelling youth that had been far away for many years. One of the reasons why he was here was to see who would get the Tomes of Arcane. However, he had grown up in the Zhisho Abbey and started reading the 6 volumes of Tomes of Arcane when he first learned to read. He did not have a sense of mystery and naturally did not have an inexplicable reverence for the Tomes of Arcane like the mortals or cultivators in the world. Therefore, this was not the real reason why he was here. At least, it was not as important as the real reason. He had come here to reminisce about the youth that had been lost for many years. Perhaps he had come to pay tribute to the youth that had been lost for many years, or perhaps he had come to find the youth that had been lost for many years. That youth was called pride. Yi Su silently turned around and looked at a certain pool in the mountains. The pool was extremely small. Perhaps there was hot water gushing out from the bottom of the pool, so it had not been frozen for a few days. However, in the end, it could not withstand the biting cold wind, and a thin layer of ice had formed on the surface of the pool. Perhaps it was many days ago, or perhaps it was just a moment ago, but the thin ice on the surface of the small pond had a very small opening. Even he couldn't be sure when that piece of thin ice had been broken. But he could confirm that the shape of the opening on the surface of the pool was very special, like the trace left by a wooden dipper. 14 years ago, he had seen that wooden dipper, and then he could never forget it. 14 years ago, the most mysterious Tian hand scroll of the 7 volumes of Tomes of Arcane showed an extremely important sign. However, the Taoist in the abbey who was responsible for looking after the tomes of arcane remained absolutely silent about it. The great divine priest of revelation of the West Hill Divine Palace entered the abbey to read the tomes of arcane and did not say much. However, no one had expected that the great divine priest of light, Wei Guangming, would take half a step into the divine domain of Tianqi at this time. His deep and pure eyes saw the shadow of the night descending on the world. This generation of world wayfarers of Taoism, Buddhism, and Diabolism gathered in the wilderness. At that time, the 3 world wayfarers were still 3 teenagers. They gathered under a small tree and silently watched the ants for a long time. Then they looked at the black line for a long time and finally left separately. At that time, Yi Su, the successor of the Jishou Abbey, was very proud and very confident. He scolded Tang as an evil spirit and disdained Qi Nian as an outsider. He chopped the small tree into 53,333 pieces with one stroke of his sword, and then recited a Taoist hymn that he was most satisfied with so far. At that time, he did not know that when the night was coming, on the other side of the black line that they did not dare to cross, there was a scholar wearing straw shoes and a shabby coat sitting calmly beside a small pond. He held a scroll in his hand and read happily. There was a wooden dipper hanging on his waist. When he was hungry or thirsty, he would drink from the pond. After that, he traveled around the world and went to the South Sea. He excitedly reported to his master. The Taoist in indigo on the reef looked at him and smiled sympathetically. At that time, he knew that there was a person sitting on the other side of the black line that day. So he could no longer be as proud and confident as before. Many years later, after experiencing the prosperity of the secular world, he succeeded in seeing through many things. So confidence naturally returned to him. However, the youth and pride of that year were no longer there. He had always regretted that he did not have the opportunity to ask the person on the other side of the line. Until today, it seemed that he finally had the opportunity. So there was no one by the small pond. Standing on the top of the snow-capped peak, he looked seriously at the pond on the mountainside. Both the ebony fork in his Taoist bun and the thin light shirt on his body were motionless in the cold wind, just like his clear Taoist heart at that moment. There was someone by the Hulun Sea outside the snow mountain. The middle-aged man looked at the shore in front of him and suddenly stopped. Then he took off the hat that he had worn for many days and revealed his face. He looked at the vast mountains in the distance. His thick eyebrows, which were like silkworms, slightly frowned. His red lips, which were like thick blood, slightly curled up, revealing a complicated smile. In the biting cold wind, he walked again from the frozen lake to the solid ground. His strong body, which was as strong as steel, completely ignored the existence of the strong wind in the wilderness. He walked northward with a murderous intent. He did not walk fast, and even a little slowly. Every time his foot fell, he would sink into the frozen ground of the wilderness, leaving a deep footprint. He left the Hulun Sea and walked to the foothills of Tianqi Mountain in the north. As time passed, the murderous aura on the middle-aged man gradually disappeared. The footprints he left behind became shallower and shallower until there was no trace left. He was not like those grand cultivators in the world who knew the destiny of the world and integrated himself with the heaven and earth. This was because he had never practiced Taoism. He used his terrifying psyche power to completely isolate his body and consciousness from the heaven and earth. It was as if he had turned himself into a stone. If he closed his eyes, he would not be able to feel his existence. However, the small pond on the mountainside, which had been quiet for a long time, suddenly moved. There was a very slight sound of splashing at the edge of the pond. The splashing sound was like the sound of a wooden dipper filling water, or the sound of the wind blowing leaves. It was also like the sound of a hand slowly closing the pages of a book. I heard that you were enlightened at the age of 13, no doubts at 30, see through in 3 months, and knowing destiny in one day. I heard that you climbed the mountain every day for 17 years without any hindrance. I heard that you saw 4 words outside the wooden door when you climbed the back of the mountain of the academy for the first time. The 4 words were, "The benevolent likes water." So you like to be close to clear streams and quiet ponds all your life. It seems that it is true today. Yi Su listened to the soft splashing sound coming from the small pond in the distant mountainside and thought about these words silently in his heart. Then, he let out an extremely lonely and satisfied sigh and took a step towards the edge of the snow-capped peak with a smile. As he took this step, the thin wooden sword behind him floated in the air and made a buzzing sound. The sun and the sky suddenly seemed to become a little brighter. Tens of thousands of beams of light shone on the wooden sword, making the thin sword body shine with golden light. An extremely pure sword style, like a condensed beam of light, came from the top of the snow-capped peak. It was calm and powerful, ignoring any space and distance, and instantly descended to the small pond thousands of feet away. Such a magical Taoism meant that he stood at the highest point in the world, at the top of the knowing destiny state. Although he had not broken the realm, he was only a step away from the Tianqi state. How many times in the world could one see such a powerful Taoism sword? When the pure sword style descended to the sky above the small pond on the mountainside, the thin ice on the surface of the water instantly became more solid. Even the tiny opening was frozen at a speed visible to the naked eye. The splashing sound had long disappeared. Somewhere on the bank of the pond, there was a slight sound of surprise. However, the reaction of the person who made the sound was a little slow. The speed at which he opened his mouth was very slow, so the sound seemed to be deliberately dragged out. It was long and distant, like the call of the protagonist of an opera when he appeared on stage. The middle-aged man at the foot of the mountain frowned slightly. Of course, he had sensed the sword intent. He did not know where the sword intent was heading, but he could vaguely guess who it was that was worthy of the man using his lifetime's cultivation to stab at. He had scattered countless spies in this wilderness and even mobilized the helpers in the military ministry. That person had appeared in the blue lake outside the city of Wei a few days ago. Why did he suddenly come here? But he did not hesitate. As a top powerhouse in the world, he could faintly feel his fate and knew that this was a great opportunity for him. Besides, he had his own pride, so he ignored the encounter on the snow-capped peak, which no one knew, but was destined to shock the world. He solemnly walked towards the exit of the valley. The valley was still filled with a thin mist, covering the smooth and steep stone walls as if they were cut by knives and axes. It also covered the sound of approaching footsteps, but it could not cover the figures of the young people inside forever. In the snow-capped peak, Yi Su, the successor of the Jishou Abbey, finally met the scholar on the other side of the line. At the foot of the snow-capped peak, the middle-aged man thought that he would soon meet the Tome of Arcane. Compared with this, it was worthwhile to wait for a long time. Whether it was 14 years or a lifetime. Double the last day. Please vote monthly. I will probably shout many times today. Sorry. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote monthly. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 308. The 4 young people with complicated identities walked on the steep and smooth stone walls. Their injuries gradually recovered after a few days, but they had run out of food and became weak again because of hunger. Ning Ke did not expect that the passage dug by the previous powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine would be so long. It seemed that they had almost crossed the entire Tianqi Mountains, but they still could not find the exit. He could not help but feel anxious. He was the most afraid of hunger. Thinking that the three women had eaten most of the food he had hidden, he felt even angrier. He stared at Tang Xiaotang and said, "We will all starve to death if we don't get out soon. How many more days will it take?" Tang Xiaotang lowered her head and looked at the beast's tail on her neck. She said in a low voice with some uncertainty, "It should be soon." Ning Ke gasped and looked at her incredulously. He said, "The three of us have been following you for so many days. Don't tell me that you didn't go through when we run out of food." Tang Xiaotang looked up at him and said pitifully, "The front gate was sealed decades ago. Of course I didn't go through it. That makes some sense. If you think about it carefully, when my youngest martial uncle was killing you with this sword, you were still in your mother's womb. You were not even born. How could you possibly know these things?" Ning Ke's tone was obviously unfriendly. He changed the topic and roared, "Why didn't you tell me at the beginning?" The reason why he dared to treat Tang Xiaotang so fiercely was because he was starving. Under the dual effects of anxiety and hunger, he did not have the time to think that this girl from the devil doctrine was the strongest among the four of them. Moreover, when they walked in the mountains these days, this girl from the devil's doctrine did not have any fierce aura of the devil's doctrine. Instead, she was innocent, cute, and even honest. He gradually forgot her identity. As expected, Tang Xiaotang did not get angry. Instead, she lowered her head in shame and walked to the front. "If we are in the knowing destiny state, how can this passage stop us?" Yi Hongyu's face was a little pale. She looked at the smooth and steep stone wall beside her and said indifferently, "In the end, it is a matter of strength." Ning Ke sneered and said, "You don't have to make fun of my low state and poor strength. You were beaten back after taking a few glances at the knowing destiny state. If you were still in the knowing destiny state, would you be so hungry?" Yi Hongyu was silent. Her beautiful face seemed to be covered by a layer of frost. Mo Shanshan said weakly, "We've run out of food. How can you still have the strength to bicker?" Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly, "I will not quarrel with him after I leave the mountain. I will kill him directly." Ning Ke ignored the Tao addict's threat. Since he escaped from Chang'an City when he was a child, he had experienced many life and death situations. How could he be afraid of this kind of threat? He was not even afraid of death. However, he did have an innate fear of hunger because of his childhood experience. After a moment of silence, he once again found Tang Xiaotang, who was ashamed and speechless, because of this fear and the anger brought by this fear. He mocked, "Probably only people from your devil's doctrine would be stupid enough to split the mountain to make a path, thus turning the escape route of people into a dead end." Tang Xiaotang raised her head and looked at him with a solemn expression. She said solemnly, "Both the Holy Land and this passage represent the will of our Enlightenment doctrine to change the world. Please show some respect." Ning Ke did not want to respond to her, especially after he had heard too many stories from Master Lotus about changing the world and creating a new world. However, he could not fully understand the obsession of the devil's doctrine. Tang Xiaotang frowned and said, "Can you not be like this? If you think that our Enlightenment doctrine is useless and a bunch of stupid people, then why did you come to our holy land?" Ning Ke replied angrily, "If not for the appearance of the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane, I would not have come even if the headmaster begged me." Tang Xiaotang's eyes lit up when she heard the words, "Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane." She thought about how she and her brother had found nothing in the Holy Land. Her gaze naturally fell on the iron box tied with a cloth belt in front of Ning Quebec. She asked, "Have you found it?" Ning Ke said, "Don't look at me like that. The ashes of an old ghost are in this box. Speaking of which, why do I have to carry it with me? Shouldn't I just find a random place to throw it away?" It was strange that after walking through the passage for a few days, the four of them talked about their childhood, cultivation, and their favorite snacks. However, Ning Ke, Mo Shanshan, and Yi Hongyu did not mention to Tang Xiaotang about their encounter at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, nor did they mention the old monk named Lotus 32. This had nothing to do with Tang Xiaotang's identity as a member of the Devil's Doctrine. It had nothing to do with the conflict between the Orthodox and the Devil. It was not even because the experience was so painful and disgusting that the three of them did not want to recall it. On the contrary, it was because the three of them treated their encounter with Master Lotus as the most precious experience in their cultivation lives and were unwilling to share it with others. Ning Ke suddenly raised his eyebrows and looked at Tang Xiaotang. He asked, "You did not find the tomes of arcane either? That is your territory. You should be familiar with the way back to your hometown. Did you not find anything?" Tang Xiaotang shook her head dejectedly and said, "There is nothing in the Holy Land." Ning Ke thought to himself that there was a pile of white bones and ghosts, and an old guy who was scarier than ghosts. All the major cultivation sects in the world had gathered in the wilderness. The West Hill Divine Palace had put in a lot of effort to find the legendary Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane when the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine opened. However, they had found nothing. The whereabouts of the legendary Tomes of Arcane had naturally become the biggest mystery in everyone's hearts. Yi Hongyu said, "The great divine priest of revelation said that the Ming hand scroll would appear here, so it will definitely appear." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "It seems that the great divine priest of revelation was wrong." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said without hesitation, "How could the great divine priest of Divine Hall make a mistake?" Ning Ke looked at her and said mockingly, "If the divine priest of light did not make a mistake 1,000 years ago, how could the Devil's Doctrine appear in this world? Or is it that the West Hill has always thought that the Devil's Doctrine is the right product?" Yi Hongyu pursed her lips tightly and did not speak to him. Mo Shanshan sighed weakly and said with a smile, "Are you not going to argue with him anymore?" Yi Hongyu nodded and said, "I did make a mistake earlier." Ning Ke felt slightly proud and thought that no one in this world could beat him in verbal skills except Sang Sang. Yi Hongyu said immediately, "Since I said that I would kill him after we get out, why should I be angry with him?" Ning Ke said bitterly, "It was just a few jokes. Don't take it seriously." Tang Xiaotang, who was walking at the front, suddenly said in surprise, "It's true. It's true." Ning Ke was startled and asked, "What is true?" Tang Xiaotang turned around and pointed at the thin mist in front of the passage. Her clear eyes were full of joy and she said, "That is really the exit. We are out." Looking at the faint light in the mist at the end of the passage, they vaguely guessed that it was the exit. After going through so many hardships and running out of food, they should be jumping for joy. They should even be holding hands, shoulder to shoulder, wearing ribbons and youthful smiles on their faces. However, they stopped and fell into silence. Even Tang Xiaotang was no exception. In the long passage, they were isolated from the rest of the world. That was why they could forget about each other's sect background and temporarily forget about the so-called good and evil, as well as the complicated hatred that could not be washed away by blood. However, once they walked out of this mountain abandoned by Haotian and returned to the real world, all these factors would return. The four of them looked at each other and remained silent for a long time. Yi Hongyu suddenly said indifferently, "I am not used to pretending to be sad. After we get out, I will need to recuperate for a period of time. So it should be a long time before I kill you and the siren from the Devil's Doctrine." Tang Xiaotang looked at her proudly and said, "You are still injured now. I will hit you when you recover." Mo Shanshan gently tidied her cotton dress and said with a smile, "Anyway, it has nothing to do with me." Yi Hongyu sneered and said, "If I want to kill Ning Ke, will it really have nothing to do with you?" Ning Ke waved his hand to stop the meaningless conversation and said, "Let's talk outside. Xiaotang, you go first." Tang Xiaotang looked into his eyes and said seriously, "I know what you mean. You are worried that there is something strange outside the fog, so you let me go first. I am a disciple of the Enlightenment doctrine. How can I escape if the people outside are all from the Central Plains? Besides, you are a man. Just like what she said, you are a disgrace to the academy. Ning Kei's expression did not change. He said seriously, why did you suddenly become so smart? Tang Xiaotang said, I am just kind-hearted. I am not really stupid. Hearing this, Ning Kei naturally thought of Sang Sang. Sang Sang was just a little stupid, but not really stupid. He suddenly had a strong desire to return to Chang'an. He looked at the exit in the fog and said, I will go first. The most powerful young disciples of Taoism, Devil and Talisman are all here. Together with me, the world wayfarer of the academy, I don't believe that anyone would not kneel down and kowtow when they see our super combination, let alone ambush us. These words were obviously used to boost his courage, just like how he had been bickering and joking with the Tao addict and the girls from the Devil's doctrine these days. The reason why he did this was to ease the heavy feeling in his chest. No one knew that he, the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, had joined the Devil. Even Yi Hongyu only vaguely guessed that he had inherited the mantle of youngest uncle and was about to return to the human world. He did not know what the cold and real world outside the valley would do to welcome him if the truth of his joining the Devil was discovered. After a moment of silence, Ning Kei walked into the fog. He reached his right hand behind him and slowly held the handle of the big black umbrella. The big black umbrella was his biggest support in this world. It was the warmest and quietest existence in the world, like a wild cat's dark house. When he faced Lotus at the front gate of the Devil's doctrine, he did not have time to take it out and almost died. At this time, he was about to return to the human world from the isolated mountain. The strange feeling and vigilance made him ready to take out the big black umbrella at any time. The world outside the fog was not under the attack of thousands of people. There was no sneak attack. Ning Kei was greeted with a fist. A fist bigger than the cheap Tuhai bowl that Sang Sang bought. The fist was open and aboveboard, full of the aura of gold and stone. It broke the wind and arrived without any sense of evil. It was not a sneak attack. It was a kill. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 309. It was indeed not a sneak attack. Even Ning Kei had to admit that it was not a sneak attack after analyzing it. Because the fist appeared very openly, and it was at least 100 feet away from his face. No one could sneak attack from a distance of more than 100 feet. Arrows could, but not fists. The reason why the fist could be seen was that the moment it appeared, all the fog in the mountain path was forcibly dispersed by the fist wind into smaller particles, and could no longer obstruct vision. The smooth and steep stone wall was clear. The mountain path was clear. That was why Ning Kei could see the fist. And the middle-aged man who was as strong as a mountain. He had no time to think, let alone see the appearance of the middle-aged man clearly, because the fist bigger than a bowl, after shattering the fog in the passage, almost came to him without a pause. In his sight, the fist instantly became countless times bigger. Because the fist was so fast, the wind in the narrow passage did not have time to swell, but was compressed and stuck to the smooth stone wall. Then all the sound disappeared, and there was a deathly silence. It was not a sneak attack, but it was more terrible than a sneak attack, because it was an absolute kill relying on super strength. In the face of such a fist that could expel the air and seemed to move faster than sound, Ning Kei only had time to make one move. It was a move that he had done countless times before his death since he was a child. He was extremely familiar with it. The strange cry caused by the strong threat of death was still brewing in his chest and abdomen, and the skin that was stimulated by the shadow of death did not have time to stand up. The big black umbrella had already opened, like a piece of the night sky, blocking in front of him. The fist fell on the surface of the big black umbrella. The big black umbrella did not break, and there was nothing in the world that could break it for the time being. But the thick and greasy surface of the umbrella sank deeply at that moment, and there was a very exaggerated deformation. This was the most serious deformation of the big black umbrella since it appeared in the world, so it could be imagined what kind of power the fist carried. In the second moment that could not be seen by the naked eye, and even time lost its effect, the thick surface of the big black umbrella began to recover, and with the recovery, the incredible and terrible power passed to the umbrella. The umbrella handle left Ning Kei's perlicue, leaving several deep white lacerations. The blood was still in the lacerations and had no time to ooze out, because the third instant was also the instant that transcended time. Ning Kei's eyes reflected the color of the big black umbrella, and then suddenly brightened for a moment. He began to suck in his abdomen, exhale, and flatten his chest. His feet began to stand on tiptoe, ready to leave the ground. Before these subtle movements could be completed, the handle of the big black umbrella had already stabbed into his chest. Fortunately, he had already made these preparations in such a short period of time, so he did not die. The handle of the big black umbrella fell like a mountain, directly hitting his chest. Ning Kei's feet left the ground, his chest and abdomen sunk, and then he flew up. That terrifying mountain-like strength gradually diminished during the long journey. For this, he paid a very heavy price, and blood spurted out like a waterfall. Although the pain in his chest kept tearing his body like a devil, and the fear of death kept stabbing his mind, his eyes were still calm and focused. He kept trying to adjust his posture while flying backward, and at the same time, the primordial chi deep in his lower abdomen quickly spread to his limbs, trying to use the remains left by youngest uncle to repair his injuries. But the fist would not give him time. In fact, the fist did not stop at all. Even the big black umbrella could not block the fist, even for a short moment. Ning Kei was hit and flew. The fist also flew up. It followed him coldly and powerfully like Yama. The passage leading from the Devil's Doctrine to the outside of the Tianqi Mountains was very secretive. In order to ensure that no one could see it from the outside or on the mountain, it was very narrow. Therefore, when the fist broke through the fog and hit Ning Kei, it had to pass by the three girls who had just reacted. Of course, the first one to attack was Mo Shanshan. How could she watch Ning Kei be beaten to death? She felt the horrible power in the fist, and the aura of the middle-aged man was as sharp as metal and stone, and even faintly stronger than that of her master. Under the pressure of many factors, the most excellent female talisman master in the world finally stimulated an unprecedented ability, and drew the most powerful half-divine talisman in the blink of an eye. The distant talisman intent condensed in the passage, and a strong airflow steamed here. However, the fist did not hesitate and directly blasted over. The airflow was completely broken, and the talisman intent was completely destroyed. The second one to attack was the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu. In fact, she did not want to attack, because she was the first one to recognize the identity of the middle-aged man. She knew that he was a visiting professor of the Divine Hall, and she knew how powerful he was. Moreover, she did not like Ning Kei at all. If that shameless guy was directly smashed into meat paste by this fist, she would not shed a tear. However, she had to attack, because she found that the fist was so perfect. Only an emotionless person could deliver such a perfect punch, and only an irreversible punch could be unstoppable. In an instant, she understood that even if the other party recognized her, there was no way he would allow such a perfect punch to be flawed in the slightest. This punch had been infused with the most absolute determination, and this was the attitude that the person who delivered the punch had towards the world. She stood on the path that the fist had to pass, so she could only display the most powerful invisible Taoist sword and cut it down. She did not have any hope for this sword, because she knew that even if she was still in the knowing destiny state, she was far from being a match for the middle-aged man. She even thought that even the great divine priest of judgment was not as powerful as the opponent. Sure enough, the most powerful invisible Taoist sword of the Tao addict was like a wooden sword of a child in front of this fist. It suddenly collapsed and shattered, and instantly became invisible, leaving no trace in the passage. The last one to attack was Tang Xiaotang. Because she thought that as a disciple of the Enlightenment doctrine, the exit might be full of the so-called righteous cultivators of the Central Plains, so she insisted on standing at the back. She did not know who the middle-aged man was, but she guessed who he was. So there was no fear in her clear eyes, but a trace of excitement. The excitement was not because she believed that she could defeat the opponent. In fact, she knew that it was impossible for her to defeat the opponent. So she did not fight head-on like she did with the Snowfield dire wolves, nor did she slash Prince Long Qing with the blood-red giant knife. Instead, she crossed her arms in front of her body, making the strongest defense she could make. Unsurprisingly, the cross-shaped arms hit back on her delicate chest heavily, and instantly dispersed. The fist style of this fist was always focused on Ning Quebec. It only occasionally passed by the three girls, and did not release its real power. However, this kind of passing by was like a flood passing by a small mountain village, destroying everything. Ning Ke closed the big black umbrella with a swoosh, letting it help him regain his balance like a black tail. Looking at the fist that was getting closer and closer, his eyes were calm and focused, and his left hand had already grasped the hilt of the knife behind him. The shadow of death was right in front of him, because the fist was right in front of him. He was very afraid. The experience of struggling for survival in the past years told him that the more dangerous the situation was, the more calm he had to be. Many times, it was this calmness that had successfully kept him away from death. He hoped that it could be the same today. It was as if Haotian or Yama had heard his prayer, moved by his calmness in the face of death. The fragments of information that Master Lotus had imprinted in his spiritual world suddenly came to life. Ning Ke could not understand those things, but he understood the fist. He even thought of many ways to deal with it without reason.